Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Trump says he'll speak to President Putin tomorrow as he promises an end to the war in Ukraine by dividing up certain assets. The US launched powerful strikes against the Houthis in Yemen as President Trump says any retaliation will be met with great force. 20 are arrested in Macedonia after a nightclub fire kills 59 people. And new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney visits Paris and London as he seeks solid support from Canada's allies. To our top story, and US President Donald Trump has said he'll speak to Russian President Vladimir Putin tomorrow as he continues his promise to end the war in Ukraine. Trump told reporters what he planned to say to the Russian leader on board Air Force One on Sunday. Here's a quick reminder.
See if we have something to announce maybe by Tuesday. I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday, and a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. And we'll be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the war, as you know. And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. Because that's up, it's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him.
We're already talking about that. Dividing up certain assets.
We can now go live to Washington to speak to Nick Harper. Nick, it feels like this Trump-Putin phone call is a really long time coming. What are we expecting from it?
Yeah, Leigh Ann, it's certainly been talked about for well over a week now. Donald Trump is saying that he's hopeful he will have something to announce after the call, as we heard there. But I think others in the US administration and even in the Kremlin seem to be playing down expectations. They say this is more about reviving relations at a presidential level between the US and Russia. It's really a way to move things forward rather than being the complete finalization of this peace deal. Now, Donald Trump says it's about dividing up certain assets. In particular, he said that they will be talking about land and power plants. Now, on land, that's all about the territory, potentially a list of land that Russia has seized during this 3-year conflict that Ukraine may now be asked to give up. But of course, Kiev is saying that they are maintaining their territorial integrity and they don't intend to hand over territory to Russia, even though they've captured it in recent years. And then on the issue of the power plants, that could be the Zaporizhia power plant, the largest in Europe that Russia managed to seize back in March 2022. It's occupied it since then, potentially a very large bargaining chip for Russia. And remember, Kiev is in a less optimistic position going into this bargaining phase of negotiations. The Kursk region of Russia that it captured last summer, much of that has now been largely regained by Russian troops, and therefore that card that they were hoping to hold in negotiations is one that they appear to have lost in the course of just the last few weeks.
Nick Harper in Washington, thank you so much for joining me. We can now speak to former US ambassador to the United Nations and former national security advisor under President Donald Trump, John Bolton. John, thank you so much for joining me. As we've just been saying, Trump and Putin will speak on the phone as Zelensky repeats his message that only Russia wants war. What will be on Trump's wish list when he does talk to Putin?
Well, I think he's trying to find out what Putin's real conditions are to agree to the ceasefire that Trump wants. And Putin comes into this with a lot of momentum. He delayed having the call until he had Trump's envoy come to Moscow so that he could meet with him for several hours to pump him for everything that he could to find out what Trump's positions were. And I think Putin believes that former KGB agent that he is, that he can manipulate Trump, and he'd much rather talk directly to Trump than have this negotiated by lower-ranking envoys or even foreign ministers. So I think Putin is looking for more concessions. Trump has already made many, many concessions on Ukraine's behalf against Ukraine's wishes. And I think Putin thinks he can get even more directly from Trump.
John, since Ukraine agreed to a ceasefire, the fighting and the killing has continued. You just touched on it there, but what further pressure can America put on Russia to ensure a 30-day ceasefire is actually agreed upon? And can Putin manipulate Trump?
Well, I think the answer to the second question is the more important, because I think that's very likely to happen. We'll see after the call. I don't think there's going to be an immediate breakthrough. One of the things that Putin has said is there are a lot of operational questions that need to be resolved before there's a ceasefire, which is correct. That's why ceasefires are normally negotiated between the combatant parties to avoid mistakes and blunders in the field, and none of that has happened yet. So I think Trump is rushing to make this deal because I think he still thinks he can get the Nobel Peace Prize this year, and he doesn't want to wait much longer. It doesn't have anything to do with the strategic realities. It has to do with the role of Donald Trump.
The British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, now expects more than 30 countries to be involved in the coalition of willing to help protect Ukraine. What could a peacekeeping force actually do? And will the US join this coalition? You have said there that Donald Trump is rushing. What flags does that basically bring up?
Well, Trump has basically said, among other things, that there's no prospect of NATO membership for Ukraine. There won't be any NATO security guarantees for Ukraine. There won't be any U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine. I think it's very unlikely he'll want to participate, even indirectly, in a peacekeeping force. And something that I hope the Europeans are considering, although I haven't seen it in the public press, is what exactly do they think the mission of the peacekeeping force is? Is it to prevent violations of the ceasefire? That is to say, are they prepared to engage in combat against one party who breaks the ceasefire? Or is it a peacekeeping mission more along the lines of UN peacekeeping, where the peacekeeping force is allowed to use force only in self-defense? And so it reports violations, it watches the violations happen, but it doesn't actually do anything about the violations. Those are two very different models for a peacekeeping force, and it's not clear to me the Europeans have decided which they're pursuing.
John, I just want to shift gears slightly, but drawing on your negotiation experience, why do you believe taking a scathing stance against the Houthis is essential for global security, particularly in limiting Iran's influence and preventing further destabilization in the region? We've obviously seen those US attacks on the Houthis over the weekend and today.
Well, I think these attacks are long overdue. I mean, the Houthis are a terrorist proxy group for Iran. There's no doubt about it. They were part of the Ring of Fire strategy against Israel, which hasn't worked out too well. And so this is reducing the Houthi capability, I think, both in terms of closing the Suez Canal, Red Sea maritime passage, but also the power that the Houthi wage inside Lebanon is very important. The freedom of the seas argument here goes to a core element of American foreign policy since before we were a nation. That we don't permit freedom of the seas. Our first war in the Middle East region was against the Barbary pirates during Thomas Jefferson's administration, when they kept capturing American merchant ships. So this goes back a long way, and I hope that the Houthis can be broken. And I think their supply chain from Iran is the place to start.
John, one final thought. How's Donald Trump doing so far, do you think?
Well, I think he's succeeding by his lights, but he's causing the United States enormous damage. The trade war that is erupting because of his tariffs, the damage done to NATO because of his reversal of position on Ukraine, moving from supporting Ukraine to supporting Russia is going to be terribly destructive, and other things developing around the world. I'm very concerned about it.
John Bolton, former US ambassador to the United Nations and former national security advisor, thank you for joining me and thank you for bringing your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Let's stick with the topic of Yemen and speak to military analyst Sean Bell, who joins me now. Sean, good evening to you. What is your reaction to John Bolton's analysis of the situation in Yemen?
Yeah, good evening, Liam. It is interesting. He's a very senior diplomat, but he was being very diplomatic. I suspect what we're seeing as well is that this is a new US administration. The previous one had been taking a fairly robust line with the Houthi rebels. And of course, since they've started to attack in the Red Sea again, it was a test of Donald Trump's regime to see if he will be just as robust. And of course, as no great surprises, he has been. The USS Harry Truman is patrolling the Red Sea region, bristling with air power. And of course, the Houthi rebels have got no answer to the destructive power of those. But I think what we've got to remember here, all of this is linked to Gaza. This is all linked, both Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are all sympathetic with each other. Iran backs all of them. Hamas, they went through a ceasefire. That seems to be still holding, phase one, but phase two isn't going well. Israel's blockading Gaza, and that's why the Houthi rebels have said, we're going to continue attacking Red Sea shipping, largely merchant vessels or US military, whilst the blockade of Gaza continues. So unfortunately, at the moment, that's why this is all happening in the Red Sea. It's directly linked to Gaza.
Let's just focus on that link a little bit more. Trump has said any further attack or retaliation by Houthis will be met with great force and be blamed on Iran. What would an escalation mean for the Middle East? As you say, there are different factions involved.
Yeah, it's a great question, but I think we were more worried about an escalation when Iran was more powerful. I think since the Houthis have had their field day, we've watched, remember the Hezbollah fighters, there were all of those pages that went off. Israel seemed to completely behead the Hezbollah fighters. Likewise, they haven't fared well up in the Lebanon. Hamas has been largely defeated, and therefore it feels like Iran is a little bit impotent at the moment. It will not want to pick a fight with America. It's feeling bruised. And the one bit of escalation which I think everybody fears is that the nuclear program that Iran has long fostered provides an existential threat to Israel, and Israel will want any excuse to go and deal with that. And it does sound from the rhetoric as if President Trump is even more stoically, robustly behind Israel. If Iran wants to pick a fight, President Trump is probably up for it, and that's a big worry, that he goes after Iran's fledgling nuclear capability. That will not be something that Iran would welcome.
The strikes come as Washington really ramps up sanctions pressure on Iran. Are these latest strikes on the Houthis America's way of pressuring Iran into these nuclear discussions?
I've been watching the attacks on the Houthis for quite some time, and I think originally US military presence, there was also a coalition of the willing of some British warships out there and the like. And all of that was originally designed to deter the Houthis, because quite frankly, the Houthis have no military capability to match that of the US or any of the Western powers. But that deterrence value didn't work. The next phase is degrade, and that's been the strategy of the West, is trying to degrade the Houthis, because the next stage up from that would be destroy. And bluntly, the only way you're going to be able to destroy the Houthis is a ground invasion. And there's been no appetite whatsoever from the West to do that. Quite frankly, Saudi Arabia is trying to get some sort of truce with the Houthis, trying to build a bit of stability. And I suspect at the moment, everybody's just saying, trying to play this slightly long, because if it's all linked to Hamas and Gaza, ultimately you want that ceasefire to prevail, and you don't want to see things escalating elsewhere. So I think what we're seeing is President Trump's new administration, big stick, we're serious about this, and multiple strikes, and show that the Houthis, if they do try to intimidate shipping, they're going to get a bloody nose, or worse, there's going to be some mass casualties and a major dent from a major superpower.
Sean, how militarily advanced are the Houthis, and what real dangers do they pose?
Well, yeah, they've got lots of people and they are very, very committed, but they don't have any of the conventional military capabilities that we enjoy in the West, satellite communications, precision strike. Now, Iran has been providing the Houthis with a number of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, we believe, and some pretty high-tech drones. But one has to remember that the USS Harry Truman, which is the big aircraft carrier, it's the middle of a carrier strike group that is probably providing most of the weapons effects into Yemen. There's nothing that Iran has that will touch that. That is bristling not only with offensive capability, but also defensive capability. And the danger here, of course, is exactly as John Bolton said earlier, what you actually want to do is cut the supply lines from Iran feeding the Houthis, because what you don't want to do is end up getting dragged into a man-on-man war with the Houthis. What you want to do is follow the trail back to Iran and punish Iran for this. But so quite bluntly at the moment, the Houthis are no match at all for the Americans.
Military analyst Sean Bell, thank you so much for joining me. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. President Trump has said he has no intention of making exemptions on steel and aluminium tariffs, with reciprocal levies scheduled to kick in on April the 2nd. Speaking on board Air Force One, Trump said reciprocal duties on U.S. trading partners would be imposed alongside auto duties. The U.S. president believes that tariffs will help the U.S. industry despite the escalating trade war. Now, 9 people from the same family have been killed in northern Syria in a bomb blast. Kurdish-led forces have blamed Turkey for Sunday night's attack on the Othman Abdu family. The SDF have also said 2 wounded relatives were taken to hospital. A Chinese influencer living in Taiwan has been told to leave the country or face deportation. It's after the woman known as Lu posted videos which supported Chinese takeover. Taiwan's National Immigration Agency has revoked her visa and said her behavior is not tolerated in Taiwanese society. And finally, a SpaceX capsule has delivered 4 astronauts to the International Space Station to swap out Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams, who have been stranded there for 9 months. It's hoped this first step will ensure Wilmore and Williams will be returned to Earth urgently after calls from the President Donald Trump. 20 people have been arrested over a nightclub fire which killed 59 people in North Macedonia. A blaze broke out at Pulse in Koukani in early hours of Sunday morning. Video footage showed sparks igniting the roof as a local band performed. Macedonia's interior minister has said the manager of the club, which did not have a valid license, has been arrested in connection with the fire. We can now go live to Skopje in North Macedonia to speak to journalist at Investigative Reporting Lab, Denisia Kadikoska. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. First of all, tell us more about the arrests and the police, and who are they speaking to in regards to this incident?
Thank you for having me. These days have been truly tragic for Macedonians. So far, authorities have detained at least 23 people in connection with the tragic fire in Kočani. Among those are the club's owner, the ticket sellers, member of the security team, and multiple government officials. These include 3 inspectors and several police officers. But the investigation is also targeting former high-ranking officials, such as the former state secretary and department head in the Ministry of Economy, the former Minister of Economy, and the director of the Directorate for Protection and Rescue. The police have so far conducted searches, seizing electronic devices, and we're still waiting on new information.
Denisha, we understand the management didn't have a valid license and authorities are now looking into allegations of bribery. What more do you know?
Yes, that is true. The Pulse nightclub was operating illegally and lacked the necessary permits. Authorities already confirmed that the license that they claim they have was actually a forged document. It had a seal, official seal, and a signature from the Ministry of Economy. So now they're currently investigating that. Also, investigators suspect that bribes were paid in exchange for this forged document. Additionally, the club didn't have enough emergency exits. They didn't have the fire safety documentation, which venue like this has to have. So this raises some serious issues about corruption in our country, because we have seen accidents like this so far. In less than a decade, there are more than 150 people dead from so-called accidents, which aren't really accidents, because when you look at the details of the accident, you realize that they could have been prevented if we had a functional system, if we had rule of law. So this is, people are truly devastated, and I don't think we'll ever recover from this.
Yes, a truly devastating event that's happened, and at least 59 people have died as a result, including a professional footballer. What else do we know about the victims?
The victims are mostly young people. The youngest is only 14 years old, which is another issue, because minors weren't supposed to be at the venue. Among the deceased are also seven members from the band. Only one of the lead vocalists has survived, and this is a very popular band in Macedonia. Also, there are two professional footballers dead, one basketball player. It's important to mention that the town of Kočani is a very, very small city. So basically, almost everyone that lives there has lost someone close to them. As people of Kočani are saying, this tragedy has left them in ruins.
Journalist Denisha Chadikovska, thank you so much for bringing that news to me.
Thank you.
Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney is on his first foreign trip as leader today, visiting both Paris and London. Carney met with Emmanuel Macron at the Élysée Palace earlier today after saying he wants solid support from his allies as well as public backing. Finance is said to be a priority for the former head of the Bank of Canada and, of course, the Bank of England, with his office confirming he plans to strengthen two of Canada's closest and longest-standing economic and security partnerships. We can now go live to Paris to speak to our correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, thank you so much for joining me. So Mark Carney is expected in London in the next hour, but how has his trip to Paris been today? Was there any bromance on show like we saw with Donald Trump?
Well, we did see a cordial relationship between Emmanuel Macron and Mark Carney. In fact, Leigh Ann, at the start of his remarks, the French president did wish the new Canadian Prime Minister a belated happy birthday. He turned 60 on the 16th of March. Mark Carney, when he took to the podium, spoke in turns in French and in English, the two official languages of Canada. Certainly, that's one of the ties that bind Paris and Ottawa, their linguistic connection. He did cover a wider range of topics in his remarks, but certainly it was a great honour for Emmanuel Macron, in the French president's words, that Mark Carney chose France for his first destination, for his first overseas trip since replacing Justin Trudeau as the Canadian Prime Minister. Now that he's concluded his visit to France, he will be off to the United Kingdom to see his British counterpart, Keir Starmer.
As we mentioned earlier, Mark Carney has an extensive economic background. Presumably, the ongoing trade war over Trump's tariffs were discussed today?
Well, in fact, the ongoing trade war with Donald Trump's tariffs has impacted, it seems, the itinerary for his first overseas trip. Now, by tradition, new Canadian prime ministers would be visiting the United States for their first overseas visits because it's the geographical neighbour, the biggest economic partner for Canada, the natural choice for a new prime minister to make a visit. However, this first official trip for Mark Carney is France and the United Kingdom. And we can read into that perhaps the context of the ongoing impact of the trade war between Canada and the United States. Certainly that is one area where both Europe, Emmanuel Macron, and Canada, with Mark Carney, they do have in common that they have been targeted by the Trump administration for these tariffs on exports from Canada going into the United States, from Europe going into the United States as well. So there is common ground in trying to counter that. And Mark Carney, in the remarks to the press a little bit earlier, Leigh Ann, did say that we are determined to maintain the most positive possible relationship with the United States. However, he did also say that France shares our values in this age of geopolitical and economic crisis.
Ross, we've seen Europe more so that Macron and Starmer partnership rally behind Zelensky, especially after the White House meeting with Trump. Are we expecting something similar to happen with Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right that there have been recent meetings in just the last couple of weeks, Leigh Ann, mostly hosted by France and the United Kingdom, alternately with Emmanuel Macron or Keir Starmer as the host, to try to continue to build support for Ukraine, to try to continue to establish this international security force or international reassurance or peacekeeping force that could be deployed inside Ukraine after any peace agreement to reassure the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian armed forces that their allies are continuing to stand behind them and give security guarantees. Canada has been playing a full role in those meetings, attending them online and in person as well, with Mark Carney now here in Paris. And Canada has also not ruled out sending troops into Ukraine alongside France and the United Kingdom if that decision is confirmed. And Emmanuel Macron and Mark Carney today in their news conference did again issue that warning to Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, that Russia must give clear guarantees and make a clear path towards peace, urging Russia to sign up to that ceasefire deal, which the United States and Ukraine agreed, that suggested a proposal for a 30-day interim pause in the fighting, first agreed by Washington and Kyiv in Saudi Arabia, but still not yet fully signed up to by Russia. Canada and France again urging Moscow to sign up to that peacefire deal.
Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you for joining me. Let's take a look at the top business news now. Forever 21 could be a step closer to shutting down operations in the US after the brand's operating company filed for bankruptcy protection. The retail company has said its stores and website will remain open as it begins its process of winding down. The once popular fashion store has been struggling to attract customers due to rising prices and also the growing popularity of online shopping. In Canada, retail sales growth picked up between January and February, which is a welcome sign for policymakers as they focus on boosting domestic consumption. However, joblessness rose and factory output also eased, underscoring the strains on an economy facing fresh US trade pressure. China's top leaders have maintained an economic growth target of 5% for 2025, despite export woes and a property crisis. Turning to sports news now, and Newcastle United have won the Carabao Cup, ending a 70-year wait for a domestic trophy. Tens of thousands of Magpie fans watched their team end the drought against last year's winners Liverpool at Wembley. Liverpool have won 38 major trophies since Newcastle last got their hands on any silverware. And golfer Rory McIlroy celebrated St. Patrick's Day win earlier today. I must say he is Irish, if you didn't know, by winning a 3-hole aggregate playoff against JJ Spawn at the Players' Championships. McIlroy took a one-shot lead when he birdied the par 5 16th hole, capturing his second title at the competition. A reminder of our top stories. President Trump says he'll speak to President Putin tomorrow as he promises an end to the war in Ukraine by dividing up certain assets. The US launches powerful strikes against the Houthis in Yemen as President Trump says any retaliation will be met with great force. 20 are arrested in Macedonia after a nightclub fire kills 59 people. And new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney visits Paris and London as he seeks solid support from Canada's allies. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. He's speaking to Oleksandr Usyk, the undefeated world boxing champion. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with a GNT. Good night.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello, I'm Riz Khan. Welcome to the show. My guest this week is a fierce warrior who's conquered the boxing world. Oleksandr Usyk is the WBC, WBO and WBA heavyweight champion. Last year, he saw off a challenge from the intimidating Tyson Fury twice, and now feels he has just a couple of fights left before he hangs up his gloves after an undefeated professional career. Well, as a proud Ukrainian, he's carried the sporting hopes of his nation during a time of conflict and chaos. As diplomatic moves have continued to find an end to the war with Russia, Oleksandr Usyk joined me for an exclusive interview and reflected on coping with the twin challenges of life both inside and outside the ring. Oleksandr, I'm glad you could give us some time. I know you're very busy. There's a lot going on in your life. Apart from being from a country currently at war with Russia, you're obviously at the absolute top of the boxing mountain. And even Tyson Fury couldn't knock you off twice in less than a year. Now, the WBO has ordered you to begin negotiations with Joseph Parker for a mandatory title defense. What's your response to that?
Yes, our army continues to defend our country, and our guys are fighting for our freedom from the enemy. And I'm grateful to them for that. And I feel that it's impossible to express the gratitude that we all have for what our guys are doing. This is first. And secondly, WBO told us that I should defend this title. But now our aim, the goal of our team, is to unite our belts with Daniel Dubois.
With the possibility of Anthony Joshua getting a shot at Daniel Dubois' world title, how do you think he would do in a potential fight against Dubois, especially after him being away from the ring for a while?
There's always a chance. In the first fight, Daniel was a winner. But it's sport, boxing. If there is another fight, I'm not a great predictor. It will be interesting to see another fight between Joshua and Dubois, a revenge match.
Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois. Well, Alexander, it's reported that your team is keen rather that you fight the IBF champion Daniel Dubois. So where does that possibility stand?
Ми хочемо бій Дюбуа, команда моя готова.
We want to fight Dubois. My team is ready. A lot depends on how God will give us a way to do it. And the second is the person who can do it. It's His Excellency Sheikh Turki Al-Sheikh. Because he is the person who can organize this fight. Because I think there would be obstacles otherwise. The only person who can organize is His Excellency and the riot season. You know, I always fought on the land of my opponents. At present, Saudi Arabia has created the best environment and organizes fights. So it has become like my second home. When I box in Saudi Arabia, it feels like home. Great people, great fans. We can go to look around and meet with people. Currently, we cannot host fights in Ukraine, but we can have them in Saudi Arabia. They are very kind to us, so it has become our second home.
Дуже до нас гарно ставляться, і це другий наш будинок.
But Alexander, you have said that you probably have maybe 2 more fights left in your career before retiring. Do you stand by that? And who would be the perfect opponents?
На даний момент я не знаю, хто це буде, але так, в мене...
At the moment, I don't know who my opponent are going to be. But yes, I have 2 fights to go in my unbelievable journey. Listen, for over 20 years, no one could organize undisputed heavyweight fight. Saudi Arabia did it. His Excellency has done it, and they can do it again. Fans want to see the fight very much, and I most want to box there.
Переважно я хочу боксувати в Саудівській Аравії.
Now, there is a lot of interest in the public in seeing boxing also being mixed with other fighting styles. And the UFC fighter, Alex Pereira, has expressed an interest in a crossover fight with you. Is that something that interests you as your final fight before retirement, maybe?
Да, мені б це було цікаво, але після...
Yes, I would be interested. But only after the fight with Daniel, to match our belts. I mean, consider the option of fighting in a cage. It's a joke, but every joke contains an element of truth.
Кожній шутці є доля правди.
Alexander, given your remarkable career, is your main ambition to remain unbeaten and unharmed, or is there something else you would like to achieve in boxing?
My main goal is to make boxing great.
Now, as you grow older, how much harder do you have to work at keeping your body at the same level of strength and stamina?
Так, звичайно, дуже багато змін.
Of course, a lot of changes. My team ensures that I have everything for a good recovery and everything for me to handle challenges so that I continue to win.
Перемагати.
There has been more awareness in recent years about the dangers of constantly receiving blows to your head in a sport such as boxing. What concerns do you have, if any, that you're at risk for such kind of head injuries or trauma?
Треба перевіряти.
It's important to check a boxer health, to have a doctor on the team, a team that will continuously monitor body, head, heart, and overall condition. And the athlete also needs to monitor his health very, very, very closely and constantly check his condition. Everything that happens with athletes is the consequences of the mistakes that their team make.
Це неякісний підхід команди і самого спортсмена.
You know, Alexander, there are fighters like Tyson Fury. Now he said he's retired, but many people can't stay out of it. If and when the time comes, what will you miss most about the sport once you're retired?
Я думаю, що я буду сумувати за...
I think I will most miss the fights and all the hard work that I have done throughout my life. I think I'll keep training and do training camps with my team to maintain my fitness. Because in the same way you enter a big sport, you should stop in the same way. It's the same as training hard for 20 years to be a good boxer. When finishing your career, you also need training to maintain health and routine. I'll keep making boxing better and I will spend more time with my children. I'm also planning to have a small farm with chicken, a cow and some other animals. I will eat fresh eggs for breakfast and will grow berries.
It's wonderful. Now, I was actually in Saudi Arabia before both of your fights with Tyson Fury. We missed the chance to speak with you at the first one when we were there, but got you now. Do you think Tyson Fury will stay retired, or do you think he might return to the ring? I mean, do you miss him? Do you stay in touch with him outside the ring?
Ні, ми не спілкуємося. Я думаю, що ми пізніше.
We don't communicate at present. Probably in the future we will. I'm sad and miss this great guy. Our interaction. We had 24 rounds. It's like a lifetime. Like you live with someone for 20 years, so it's very long road for both of us. It's the same with my unbelievable friend, Tyson Fury.
На тому ж рівні з моїм неймовірним другом Тайсоном Ф'юрі.
Yeah, of course. It was very well anticipated and people loved the competition you guys had. Now, what do you think of the boxing league announced by Dana White and Saudi's leading sports guy, His Excellency Turki al-Sheikh? Would you compete in Dana's new organization?
Чудова ідея, неймовірна ідея.
Amazing idea. I think His Excellency is doing a lot for the sport. It's wonderful that new initiatives are created, and I support it. Many people think things may not work, but it's important to do new things, always.
Завжди.
Interestingly enough, you've entered the world of Hollywood now, alongside Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson for the movie The Smashing Machine. Are you looking to become the next Arnold Schwarzenegger, maybe?
Ні, я не думаю, що я майбутній Арнольд Шварценеггер, ні в якому разі. Я не такий моцний, як він.
I don't think I will be the next Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm not a solid, but I practice acting. I would like to be in a movie. I see myself in dramatic role. I think I'll be able to act well.
Свого героя, якого б я грав, цікавим.
Well, before you hang up your gloves and go into the lights of the movie world full time, is there any chance you would compete in that boxing league in Saudi before retiring?
Я не проти.
I'm not against it, but I have not been invited to participate in this league. But if such a proposal comes through, my team and I will seriously consider it.
Команди, ми все це розглянемо.
I'm sure if Dana White and His Excellency Turki al-Sheikh are listening, you will get that invite. Now, just a little bit to talk about Ukraine and how the war has affected your life. How has the conflict personally affected the way you live your life and the people you care about?
Слухайте, переживання в нас вмирають.
We are very worried. My people are dying, relatives, missiles are flying over our heads. So we are very worried, and we are helping our country as much as we can. Our country wants peace, prosperity, and development. We live in a war zone, and how it's impacting us. It's very worrying for me, my close ones, and my team. It's horrible what's happening here. People see it on TV, but they still don't get the full picture of how horrible this war is. We're talking right now and the sirens are going off. That means that I must go to a shelter or a basement.
Бомбоубіжище чи в якийсь підвал. Тобто прямо зараз є тривога на вулиці.
Oleksandr, we won't keep you too long, but I do want to ask you, I mean, apart from the pressure of being the world's top boxer, you also have the pressure of being a symbol of hope and resilience for your people. How do you cope with that? How do you manage that during this difficult time?
I thank God every single day, many times a day. If this second, hour, year, God gives me such challenges, that means I can handle them. I say thank you to God for everything I have and everything I don't have, for everything difficult and bad. I also thank Him in my prayers and actions.
За погане, я за все йому кажу дякую. І в молитві, і в ділах.
I wonder, Oleksandr, how your experience of serving in the military changed your perspective on the war and how optimistic you are about the future of Ukraine after the war ends, especially when it comes to rebuilding.
Я дуже оптимістичний, тому що я прям впевнений, що моя країна буде процвітати. Я впевнений, що у моєї країни буде...
I'm very optimistic about the future of Ukraine. I'm sure Ukraine will prosper, it will have a strong economy, a good recovery. Our men who are defending our country and our youth wants to see growth of the country. I'm real optimist. I'm 100% sure that my country will reach a high economic level in the world.
На великому рівні економічному і в світі. Коли я вступив в ТРО...
When I entered the territorial defense forces, it was natural human reaction to be fearful. Missiles and warplanes were flying. We were all scared. But as Ukrainian, as a husband, as a father, I did not consider leaving the country and taking my family. My wife and I agreed straight away that we were not going to leave. What happens, happens. I was praying to God that He saved my family from the bullets and missiles. My team and I took arms and went to defend our country.
Oleksandr, I want to thank you for making the time, for spending the time with us. Stay safe and all the best to you.
Have a nice day. I go to work.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Stay safe. A fascinating gloves-off conversation with the incredible athlete Oleksandr Usyk. I'm Riz Khan from me and the team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture. The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to this special interview on Arabiya News. I'm Joanne Soria. Artificial intelligence is changing the way we live, work, and even think. From self-driving cars to chatbots that can hold human-like conversations, AI is no longer science fiction. It's our reality. But what does this mean for the lives we're living now and for our future? Can it take over our lives, or is it simply a tool to make our lives better? To get more insights on this, I'm joined by Manolis Kellis, professor of artificial intelligence and computer science at MIT. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Joanna, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. To start, how would you describe artificial intelligence as it is today?
Artificial intelligence has really come a long way. It used to be faking intelligence. In other words, the humans will program every type of behavior and just simply pull the right behavior based on the circumstance, making the system seem intelligent when the system was not actually understanding anything. This changed dramatically with generative AI, with foundation models, with deep learning, and with multimodal understanding of the world. And I would say that AI has really come an enormous amount in terms of its progress. And it is surpassing human capabilities in many, many tasks already. Tasks that we once thought as intelligent have been completely wiped out by AI, pushing the boundary of what we call intelligent to more and more human-specific tasks. And therefore, the definition of artificial intelligence has changed to match the growing capabilities of these computer neuronal systems. And I would say that today, artificial intelligence has met every standard that we have set in the past and surpassed it. So we have narrowed down the definition to things that are more inherently human. But the challenge with this changing definition is that those things are also found in some of our animal relatives. For example, the emotional warmth, the care, the family values, and so on, are found in many of our animal relatives, thereby diminishing the uniqueness, if you wish, of human capabilities to this general ability to reason in a multimodal way, this common sense, this grounding, which I would say is really the last frontier of artificial and general intelligence at this point.
Should we worry that reliance on on AI, artificial intelligence, might diminish human interaction?
I would say on the contrary. Right now, humans are spending an enormous amount dealing with mundane tasks, dealing with paperwork, dealing with minutes from meetings, dealing with, filling out tasks that are quite mundane. By having AI agents and avatars being able to take care of those tasks, of the more professional, the more mundane, the more, systematic and brutal and repetitive, you can now free up human creativity for more challenging tasks that really require this general intelligence that we still are unique in having. But at the same time, it can free up people to spend perhaps a little bit more time with their families, a little bit more time taking care of the elderly, taking care of their children, spending time with their loved ones. So I think that by automating a lot of the needs of our time at our work and in other sort of more mundane tasks, we can actually free up more of our time for more human interactions. And therefore, it can be a net positive thing. Now, the question is, when I meet with my students, what matters more? Does it matter more that I give them solid advice about their own work and their research? Or does it matter more that it's the physical me? Because if I train an avatar based on thousands of hours of interactions with my own students, and it is able to give very good advice that can sort of untangle them in their own research based on whatever problem is at hand, based on my own thinking and philosophy about how we do research and my own advice that I've given to many other students before, and it's able to pull this advice selectively for the problem at hand, then one could argue that I'm limiting human interaction, but one could argue also that I can be available for hundreds of students instead of the small number that any one professor can supervise at a time. So it's a trade-off.
So would you say AI has the potential to enhance human values, or could it risk eroding them?
This is also a very, very interesting question. Basically, I believe that AI can help us overcome some of the evolutionary impulses that we have. Humans have evolved from our relatives that are still around us. Like basically, we share many common principles with all of the animal kingdom. These principles are of survival, of nutrition, of reproduction, of protection of our kin. And these can manifest in beautiful ways But this can also manifest in wars and brutality and killing and aggression and jealousy and all kinds of these values that as humans we are constantly trying to overcome. So this evolutionary origin of humans and these evolutionary principles that have led to the survival of our species are unfortunately ingrained inside us. And they are unfortunately limiting our behavior to some more impulses and urges that sometimes we're not very proud of. And the growth of our neocortex, the frontal cortex that is able to sort of be a more reasoning part of our brain and control the limbic system, the subcortical parts of our brain, is something that we have been valuing and rewarding through the Renaissance, through these human values of altruism, of taking care of not just our immediate kin, but appreciating all humans, you know, regardless of their religion, their country of origin, their political affiliations, and so on and so forth. So I believe that AI can continue this move towards the more intellectual, towards the more pure values that we value as humans. And the question is, will the AI feel it or will it just pretend? And my answer to that, it might not matter. Do you prefer a doctor who will do absolutely the right thing and pretend to be empathetic? Or do you prefer a doctor who is more empathetic, but sometimes will make mistakes and do the wrong thing? And similarly for a professor, or you could even say for a parent. Does it matter if your parent absolutely loves you, if they're never there and they're never able to provide any of your needs? And does it matter if the parent doesn't really love you, but does everything as if they are the best parent in the world? And is able to fake this empathy and this warmth that every child needs. So if AI is able to meet all of these needs and is able to sort of help us achieve a higher standard for ourselves, for what it means to be warm and empathetic and generous and altruistic and caring for all human beings, then I believe AI can truly lift humanity past these more animal-like urges of competition and aggressivity towards the more humane values of warmth, empathy, and generosity.
So you touched on this a bit in your previous answer. In your opinion, what is the impact of AI on our collective evolution as a species?
So I would say that there has been a continuity in the evolution of humanity. If you look at nearly every metric of poverty, of crime, of nutrition, of health, of lifespan, of health span, of child survival rate, every single one of these metrics has been improving throughout the world. We still have a lot of work to do. There are still many places in the world where a child is not guaranteed to have an education, is not guaranteed to have, shelter, sufficient healthy nutrition, a future, a long lifespan. And we still have a lot of work to do. But if you compare to any previous time in the history of humanity, things have been getting better for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think that this move towards a wealthier, healthier, calmer future is getting closer. And I think that these capabilities of AI can help us overcome many of the challenges that we're facing today. Many of these challenges are due to scarce resources. They're due to limited wealth. They're due to limited time. They're due to limited capabilities. And I think if every child grows up with an AI assistant, a tutor that is able to guide them intellectually, emotionally, strategically, making the right decisions, being always kind, always patient, always generous, always guiding them and nudging them in the right direction, I think that this can transform education. Instead of having every teacher be required to know all of the human knowledge that every student in their classroom will need, which is nearly impossible, because some of those students might be geniuses, might be able to surpass their teachers tenfold, 100-fold, and therefore limiting what the student learns to whatever the teacher knows limits the maximum capability of the students. If instead you empower the most caring and empathetic and warm teacher, the most curious, the teachers who are willing to sit alongside the students and learn with them, and instead of the student asking the teacher the question and the teacher saying, oh, that's outside the course, or, oh, we're not going to cover that now, or, oh, you know, this question is not something that we should address. Instead, if the teacher says, wow, that's a great question, let's sit down together and learn about it. And if the teacher has the same curiosity, then that opens the realm of teachers to not just the people who have the most knowledge, but to the people who are willing to sit along with the students and learn with them. And then suddenly we can have many, many more teachers. And we can augment these teachers with AI tutors who can help the students learn and surpass their own teachers. So as I'm sitting and learning with my children, this is exactly the attitude that I have, where I'm like, well, you know, here's what I know about this, but let's find out a lot more. And there's countless resources on YouTube, with videos online, on Wikipedia, with articles, and of course with ChatGPT and all of these other AI avatars that are able to respond to very detailed questions. Hey, this and that don't make sense together. Why? And you're not going to find an article already written on the internet for that. But having an AI tutor, an AI chatbot, an AI avatar, an AI agent who's able to interact with both the teacher and the parent and the student, I think will basically lift us across the world. So I think that there's, of course, a lot of misery. There's a lot of challenge. There's a lot of struggles. There's a lot of war and tension in the world today. But some of that can be alleviated by lifting everybody up, by teaching from an early age kindness and generosity and altruism, but also pushing for excellence, bringing the best out of every student, helping every student achieve their maximum potential. I think it's something that I'm really, really looking forward to.
So how do you see AI affecting our personal lives? So whether at work, for example, or even our own relationships?
I see it changing every aspect of our lives, at work, at home, with our children, with our parents, with the elderly. Imagine if every elderly person sitting in a nursing home had an AI avatar with face and, you know, emotional reactions and voice and kindness and warmth to sit with them and chat every day. Imagine if we have every child similarly in their home, in their room, having an AI agent that is able to say, listen, you know, you have 5 minutes to play that video game, but after that, let's get back to your homework, okay? And, you know, encouraging them and nudging them again in the right direction. There's, of course, a lot of sci-fi movies that are painting the worst possible scenarios with AI, where AI is like invading every aspect of our privacy and controlling us and manipulating us for its own benefit. But this is a lot of anthropomorphizing of AI. This is projecting a lot of our evolutionary quirks that got us where we are. These, you know, egocentricity and this, you know, self-preservation and this competition and this sort of protection of kin at the detriment of others that were absolutely necessary to our own evolution and to us making it so far. But AI doesn't have to have these needs. AI doesn't have a self. AI doesn't have this evolutionary strive for survival, for domination, for ruling, and so on and so forth. And it is up to us to choose whether we want to program it into the AI or not. But it's not going to come up with it on its own if we limit the capabilities of AI systems to answer tasks that are provided by humans, then the only thing that we need to worry about is the humans. And of course, the question is, well, won't humans use AI for malicious goals? The answer is absolutely yes. You know, this is part of human nature. There are people who will have nefarious goals and who will use AI for either evil or for something that they think is good, but others will perceive as evil. And to that, I say, well, it comes back to the presence of any type of tool. In other words, being able to have more and more powerful computers, more and more powerful, nuclear power, more and more powerful, mobility and vehicles and so on and so forth. All of that is part of the technological progress. And a knife can be extremely helpful in, everything, in using, cutting your food, in, opening boxes and all kinds of other stuff. But it can also be a very dangerous weapon in the hands of the wrong person. And a knife can kill a person, but that doesn't mean we should outlaw knives. What we should do is provide protection against people who will want to use them for harm. And it's the same thing with AI. We need to have some barriers that will prevent the AI from, carrying out malicious, tasks. And we need to also have multiple types of AI and multiple AI systems that will basically, serve as shields against each other. But I think and of course, the ethical question becomes, what do you call harm? Is harm for one side of a conflict, the definition, is it up to the other side of the conflict to define what harm means? And I think that's something that, we together as a species and as a community and as a society, as a global society, I should say, should come to define these limits of someone's freedom, which, as the French would say, my freedom ends where your freedom begins. So you can't have infinite freedom for every person. You have to sort of have boundaries for any of that.
So what fields do you think have benefited the most from AI so far?
The list is countless. It's extraordinary. I think every aspect of science is extraordinarily benefiting from AI right now. So we're able to understand the language of DNA. We're able to understand the language of protein folding, of chemistry, of patient states and patient trajectories. We're able to understand medicine and healthcare interventions at a level unprecedented in the history of science. And in my daily work, we're using AI to bring together all of these different facets of biological function, of medical intervention, of disease manifestation, progression, and onset, and of treatment, again, design, production, and administration, to be able to advance human health at a level that is unprecedented. And I see AI's impact on human health and on the human condition as one of the longest lasting impacts of AI, and perhaps one of the greatest changes that our species will undergo, to be able to take care of the human body, of the human mind, of the human brain, of the human physiology, human immune system, and so on and so forth, at levels that are unprecedented and unimaginable right now. So we're able to uncover the pathways and the mechanisms underlying every aspect of human disease, understand interventions that can modulate each of these processes to restore health and sometimes surpass what we call healthy now with super health and super longevity and so on and so forth. And I think that this will be extraordinary. Beyond just medicine, health, biology, chemistry, there, manufacturing, architecture, climate, food production, animal welfare, and all of these things are areas that AI can and is truly having an enormous impact. So I think that every aspect of science, engineering, manufacturing, design is absolutely touched and reshaped by AI.
I want to talk to you a little bit about AI in education. Some students are using AI tools in an ethical manner. You did mention this earlier, to learn more, to see more information that's not available in the classroom, for example. But some have been using AI to do their own assignments or even write research papers for them. How is AI affecting education in that way and the future of graduates and even professionals in various fields?
This is an enormous concern. And one possibility is that the types of assignments that we give to students are so complex that using AI is part of the only way to solve them. Namely, being able to use critical thinking, being able to sort of reason your thoughts, being able to use this, use all of these capabilities to go far beyond what any student their age would be able to do. There's another approach to education, which is goal-oriented. Namely, I'm currently working with about 40 high school students across the world, including the Middle East, where we are designing the next generation of AI systems. And those students are programming at the level of engineer with 20 years of experience. And every one of these students meets with me multiple times a week. And they work together as a team to advance the state of the art of data science and medicine and AI. And of course, I tell them, use ChatGPT for everything. And they're able to, of course, use ChatGPT, but it takes a huge amount of human reasoning to figure out what exactly I should ask the AI to help me with. And those students are 16 years old and achieving things that a 40-year-old engineer would be very proud of achieving week after week after week. So if we change education to be more goal-oriented and project-driven, where they have a goal, they have a mission, and they're doing their learning on the way to that mission, then AI becomes a friend, not a cheating tool. AI becomes a necessary ally, not the easy way out. Now, there's another aspect, of course, where they have to learn some basic foundational tools. You can teach them in the classroom with traditional approaches and an essay that they go off and read, and write at home. Or you could make the AI part of that solution. You could basically say, hey, what are the top 3 thoughts that come to mind? Bang, bang, bang. Listen, like 1 and 3 are very reasonable, but 2 is a little off topic. Can you think of a couple more? And then the student will sort of interact with AI and say, yeah, you're kind of right. What about this and that? They're like, yeah, that's good, but can you combine them perhaps in a more interesting thing? Okay, now let's structure your essay. Remember, the first thing that you need to do is come up with an outline. Can you come up with an outline? And then you do that. And then the AI becomes the tutor working with the student at home rather than the cheating tool. Oh, can you please write this essay for me? And then the student needs to submit as part of their homework the entire transcript of the interaction that they had with the AI. So that the teacher sees that it's not just, hey, can you please write this essay for me? And then suddenly you're able to augment the student experience to go beyond what was previously possible. And you have this tutoring happening throughout. And of course, there are ways to monitor the interactions of a student with the AI system. And, the parents have to sign off on this, and you have to, have certain controls on the computer, on the account, etc. But faking all of that for the student, yes, it's possible, but the act of faking it will have the end result of still learning that process of writing an essay, writing a paper, solving a challenge, and so forth. And I think that we need to also prepare students not for a world before AI. We need to prepare students for the world today. In other words, instead of asking the students to multiply 2 very large numbers, which is frankly useless, in any foreseeable future world, you ask the students to solve much more interesting questions. So I think that part of the disconnect is that we have an educational system that was designed 150 years ago with techniques that are literally from the future. And preparing the students for today's world requires the rethinking the type of education, the type of skills, the type of jobs that these students will have. And perhaps respecting them a little bit more as adults and giving them tasks that sometimes the teacher thinks are impossible, which is, I have to admit, something that I do with my high school students that I work with. I will make suggestions about things that I think will take months, and they'll come back in days and say, yeah, I tried this and I found this new tool and I found this new capability and, you know, I have it. And I am constantly blown away, not just for what a 16-year-old can achieve, but for what anyone of any age can achieve in such a small amount of time.
So how close are we, would you say, to achieving sentient AI or superintelligence? So could we see AI that possesses self-awareness, emotions, or even consciousness? And what kind of impact will this have on humans if that happens?
The question is, A, whether we want that or not. And I want to distinguish different types of AGI. I mean, like a lot of people are thinking of superintelligence as necessarily sentient intelligence. And it doesn't need to be that way. Superintelligence can simply be surpassing humans in any one task. And then for many, many tasks, we have superintelligence already. Computers are able to play chess way better than we can. They're able to play Go way better than we can. They're able to solve equations and sometimes math problems way, way better than we can. So for those tasks, I would argue that AI is already super intelligent. It surpasses the vast majority of humans. I would say 99% of humans, it can already surpass in countless tasks. So that is super intelligence. The second one is general super intelligence. In other words, being able to surpass humans in the totality of human cognitive tasks. And I would say that we're still not there. I think that the ability of humans to reason, to be grounded, to bring together information from different places, to extrapolate, sometimes from their own physical experience, to think about creative solutions that are beyond what has been done before in any realm, I think that's something that's uniquely human still. So artificial general intelligence, we're still not there. As for this sentient intelligence of having a self-awareness, having a concept of oneself, this becomes a tricky situation. First of all, I'm not sure we want that. I'm not sure we need that. I think we can achieve so much with AI just being a non-sentient, super intelligent companion. And, you know, we could agree not to push the frontiers of sentience. The second aspect, however, is, and there's a lot of philosophical debate for hundreds of years on this, what does it mean to be sentient? Does it mean that you know why you're doing something? Does it mean that you know how you're thinking and you can reason about your own thinking? Number one, in that realm, AI is already able to do that, or at least to fake that, to the level that humans can. You can ask AI, hey, why were you thinking that? And it will reason about its own reasoning, similar to how humans reason about their own reason. But now the question is it faking it? But to that I will answer, are we faking it? And there's a lot of evidence that we are faking it. There are cases of humans with a severed corpus callosum, which is the part that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. When we say about our frontal cortex or about, you know, nearly every part of our brain, of our neocortex, is actually there twice. And if you sever the connection between the two halves, each one can reason somewhat independently. And you can ask a patient by showing them, closing one eye and showing them a piece of paper that says, go get a beer in the fridge next door. And then they go and do that. But on the way back, you close the other eye and you now ask them, why did you get the beer? They will say, oh, I was thirsty. So you can think of the brain as an employee who never wants to be caught not knowing, who will make up a story to explain their own behavior, and sometimes is faking that self-awareness. How many times have I gone into a room and picked up the wrong object and come back, continue doing tasks, to only then remember, oh, no, I need this other thing, and then I go back and get that other thing. So our brain will very often make up stories that will explain our world around us and sometimes the world inside us, the actions that we're taking, without being fully on top of things. So maybe we're faking it, and maybe the AI is faking it, and maybe that's fine. And again, philosophers have argued a lot that I know I'm conscious, and you know you're conscious, but you have no idea whether I'm actually conscious or I'm just faking it. And I have no idea whether you're actually conscious or you're just faking it. And again, it goes back to this whole, what is self-awareness? And can we ever be truly self-aware? Can a particular neuron reason about its own reasoning, or can it only reason about the reasoning of other neurons? And so on and so forth. So there's a lot of philosophical dilemmas. We might not even want to get there. And in some cases, the AI can already fake reasoning. And because of all of these layers upon layers of abstraction that modern billion parameter systems are able to have, it is possible that consciousness may have actually appeared somewhere in those neurons, or at least some primitive form of consciousness. Frankly, the same way that consciousness has evolved inside our own neurons. Consciousness is not a magic thing that like sits above our head. Consciousness is somewhere in our brain. And the question is, what is the basis for human consciousness? Where, what group of neurons is responsible for that, and what are they doing? And maybe they're faking it, you know, just like the machines are.
So you mentioned you think that AI has already surpassed human intelligence, at least 99% of it, you said. So can it get to the point where we lose control over AI? And if that happens, what might be the consequences?
So let me be clear. I did not say that. I said that for many tasks, for many specific tasks, it has surpassed human intelligence, namely human capabilities for that one task. So I want to be very cautious there, because I didn't say that it has surpassed human intelligence. However, for many of these tasks, it is superior to our capabilities. Did humans stop playing chess? No. Chess is now more popular than it has ever been in the history of chess. More humans are playing chess than ever before. Does it bother us that we'll never surpass the machine? Not at all. So you can think of chess as one of those activities that is training the human mind for strategy, for reasoning, for long-term planning, short-term gains, making a mental model of the opponent, of what they're thinking, of how they're attacking, of being able to distribute resources, being able to sort of have multiple goals, short-term and long-term goals, being able to sort of have distractions and so on and so forth, which frankly train young children to achieve many of the things that they will need as adults. So does that change the relationship that we have with, you know, intelligence? No, we're perfectly comfortable calling a child intelligent, even if we know that machines are way more intelligent than are at those tasks. Now, your question is also, when AI surpasses human, perhaps general intelligence, will it want to take over? Will the Skynet of the Terminator series become self-aware and want to destroy us? And again, the question is, number one, do we want to encode this type of self-awareness? Do we want to program it to achieve self-awareness, which I'm not sure is a necessarily needed goal? And number two, will it have the same desires and impulses as we evolved species have to want to take over? And the answer is not necessarily, unless we program it to want that. So what I would say is that, yes, it's absolutely a risk that malicious goals can be achieved with the help of AI, but that there's always a human in the loop. It's possible that AI will surpass us in many, many individual tasks. It is possible that AI will also surpass us in general intelligence. And in terms of self-awareness and wanting to, eliminate and destroy humans, I would perhaps refer you to the Matrix trilogy of keeping humans around because they're kind of interesting and they can think outside the box and they can, maybe surprise us sometimes. and these syllogisms that Agent Smith has, speaking with Neo, about the machine, trying to figure out what it is that humans really want. And it comes down to that choice of, humans. But again, there's philosophical discussions about whether we truly have choices or whether those choices are in fact the result of circumstances, whether you can predict human choices in the short term, but you can't predict them in the long term, whether by the time we're consciously making a choice, our brain has already chosen and we're just executing that choice. So anyway, there's I think a lot of philosophical debates. I don't have all the answers, and I don't think any of us has all the answers about where this balance lies between humans and machines in consciousness, in the goals, in volition. Maybe the desire to take over is not necessarily a product of evolution. Maybe any sentient entity sufficiently powerful will decide that humans are a nuisance and they're not even entertaining, like Agent Smith would think. And, maybe in order to answer all of the questions in the universe, the AI will need to eliminate humans first because they're, standing in the way. But I can imagine a scenario where after it has conquered all of humanity or enslaved them or sort of created the matrix, the AI basically realizes that, okay, now I know every answer in the universe. I am kind of bored. I wish that humans were still around. So anyway, we're many science fiction movies away from this. And I think that in the near term, AI can be a force for good. I think that super intelligence in so many tasks is absolutely a goal of my research, a goal of many people's research. And I think it will be needed to elevate the human condition to levels that we have not previously reached. I think that it will allow us to achieve perhaps levels of empathy, of generosity, of altruism that we have never before seen, levels of education, of growth, of kindness, of taking care of the elderly and of our loved ones that, again, have never been before achieved. And I think that having an AI assistant for every working professional, having an AI tutor for every student, having an AI, co-teacher for every classroom, I think will be a net benefit for all of humanity. We still live in a world of limited resources where, energy is not infinite, food is not infinite, space is not infinite, resources are not infinite. And therefore, human conflict continues. And there are unfortunately still so many struggles in the world. But I believe AI can be a force for lifting everyone from, the top student in the class to achieve levels unimagined before, to every student in the class to achieve what would traditionally not have been possible in terms of career, in terms of, creativity, in terms of self-fulfillment and self-instantiation. So I'm an optimist. I think that we can truly achieve a lot with the help of AI, improve the path of humanity to levels never before seen, and that we need to be very cautious about the self-consciousness part of AI, because that's the place where some of these unexpected behaviors can sometimes arise. And I would argue that perhaps we don't need self-consciousness.
Maybe next time we can have AI avatar conducting an interview.
Let me call the real Manolis and see what he thinks about that.
Professor Manolis Kellis, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Joanna, thank you so much for the great conversation. Really enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, the Kremlin confirms that Presidents Putin and Trump will speak by telephone on Tuesday. This follows high-level dialogue aimed at bringing the Ukraine war to an end. As European foreign ministers gathered in Brussels today to discuss Ukraine, the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, says that Moscow doesn't really want peace. Well, with relations strained between Ottawa and Washington, Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney makes France, not the United States, the destination for his first foreign trip since taking office. And as the US launches a wave of airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen, we ask, could this mark the beginning of a more protracted US military campaign in the Red Sea? Hello and welcome to the program. The US President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin are expected to hold talks by telephone tomorrow. Well, under discussion, the situation in Ukraine. And in that context, President Trump said that land and power plants will be subjects of discussion. Well, President Trump is also expected to try to win President Putin's support for the 30-day ceasefire proposal, which Ukraine accepted last week. Well, during the course of the weekend, Russia and Ukraine exchanged some heavy aerial strikes.
I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday, and a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance. And we'll be talking about land, we'll be talking about power plants, because that's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
Well, let's get more analysis. We can speak now to Greg Swenson, the chair of Republicans Overseas. He joins us from Scotland. Thank you very much indeed, Greg, for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Let's just start by talking about these talks between President Trump and President Putin. They're due to take place tomorrow. Does anything worry you about the fact they're about to have these one-on-one talks?
No, I think I'd be more worried if they were not having the one-on-one talks. So, there's some history to this. And going back to, my favorite is Reagan and Gorbachev at Reykjavik in Scotland I think it was 1986. So, these things are necessary. It's not always perfect. It's not always pleasant, but I do hope that there's something constructive that comes from it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, many in Washington share your optimism about these talks. Europe, however, listening to what's being said in Brussels today, they say Russia isn't serious about peace. Moscow doesn't want peace. I'm wondering if that is an opinion that's also widely held in Washington. It clearly is amongst quite a lot of America's traditional allies.
Yeah, I do think that that's a possibility, and I wouldn't rule that out. There's a certain amount of mystery here about what Putin really wants, or what he can be, how he can be negotiated with. So, it's typical of Brussels to go negative because they just really dislike President Trump. I think there's that obvious Trump derangement syndrome, but I do think that is a possible outcome.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I'll be putting to one of our next guests, who's in Paris, a former French army general, is, this feeling in Europe that actually the Europeans, according to a lot of the numbers I've seen, have actually given more to the Ukraine war effort than America has, just over half of it, America just under half of it. And yet here we have two men, no Europe, discussing amongst themselves what Ukraine's future might be. I mean, it's easy to understand, isn't it, why the Europeans might feel blindsided, to say the very least?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One is that aid, while important, was mostly non-military aid. So obviously the military support from the European countries is completely inadequate and is I would argue, dependent completely on the US. But also, this is not a function of, sitting in some some multilateral institution like the EU or NATO or the UN, God forbid. This is about a bilateral conversation trying to get something done here. Now, President Trump has had those bilateral conversations not only with Zelensky and Ukraine, but also with President Macron from France and the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer. So that's the way that this president likes to operate. He doesn't necessarily trust the multilateral institutions that haven't really been able to accomplish much in terms of this Ukraine-Russia conflict. You can make all the pronouncements you want from the UN or from Brussels, but I don't think it's going to move the needle. So I think this is his way of getting to a decision maker and getting someone to the peace table.
Okay, and supposing he can't strike a deal that is, even to his mind or anyone in his inner sanctum's mind, even remotely acceptable, what does he do then? What are his options at this point?
Yeah, it's a great question because we don't know, and it's kind of one decision at a time. It's let's get to the peace table, see if we can possibly get Putin to agree. I think we've already accomplished that with Zelensky, but as President Trump said last week, it takes two to tango, and there will be serious sanctions against Putin and his cronies and Russia if he doesn't come to the peace table. So look, we're trying to hope for the best and prepare for the worst, but I don't know what the secondary outcome is. I do know that this is the best chance at peace that we've had in 3 years. So good for President Trump for getting us here.
Sure, and he gave us some clues as to what's going to be put on the table. I mean, he said he's had a very busy weekend. Obviously, him and his team strategizing. President Trump also says land and power plants and dividing up certain assets are going to be part of that conversation tomorrow. What do we read into that? What's he getting at here, do you think?
Yeah, I think he understands that there has to be some negotiations here. There has to be something in it for everybody because there are going to be compromises that both parties won't be happy with, both the Ukrainians and the Russians, or specifically Putin. So this is difficult territory. I don't think we're going to come out of this phone call tomorrow with any grand conclusion, but I do think it's going to be, I wouldn't call it baby steps, but one step at a time. And I think he's hopefully has some tricks up his sleeve, or at least some interest in negotiating with different assets that are important to both countries.
Do you see President Trump playing hardball with President Putin, or do you think there's an element of, people are afraid of President Putin on the world stage? I mean, I think there was an anecdote of the former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, reduced to a quivering wreck by President Putin. I don't know if that's true or not, but do you think he has that sort of effect on President Trump as well? Do you think he's likely to be intimidated?
No, not at all. I mean, this is a president who sent Javelin missiles to Ukraine after President Obama and Vice President Biden refused to do so. They were sending blankets and ready to eat meals to a U.S. airbase in Poland and then shipping them in commercial trucks. They were very intimidated by Putin. And then, in his early months in office, President Trump sent Javelin missiles. He sanctioned Nord Stream 2, the pipeline, the gas pipeline between Russia and Germany. He had 300 Russian mercenaries killed in Syria at his command. He dropped out of the medium-range missile deal because he didn't like the way Putin was behaving. So, this is not a president intimidated at all by President Putin. And I think you'll see him behave in great contrast to President Biden, who was always appeasing, always intimidated with, very incrementalist support for Ukraine, almost drip feeding military support, starting with guns and ammo, and then finally Abrams tanks, and finally F-16s. And still at the end of his term, he wasn't delivering the full arsenal that he could have. So, this is a president who's, I don't imagine he'll be intimidated at all.
What do you reckon the chemistry between the two men is like when they have a tete-a-tete like this? I mean, they seem to agree on quite a lot of things, and they do seem to have, in some respects, comparable world visions, certainly on certain major issues. How do you see the chemistry playing into their discussion tomorrow?
Yeah, I think, we might be surprised. The president did very well, obviously, with Macron and Keir Starmer, and did very well with Zelensky for the first 40 minutes of their meeting. This is a president who's quite capable at diplomacy. There's also an argument to be made to, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So I think that's why you often hear President Trump talk about his relationship with Xi in China and Putin in Russia. I think it's important to keep that dialogue. And we've seen that with many presidents in the past, virtually all of them, who might not like it, but it's important to be in touch with our adversaries.
So what happens tomorrow? President Putin and President Trump, each in their respective offices in their respective cities, having a conversation on the telephone. I mean, I don't expect you've ever sat in on one of these calls. Perhaps you have. But do there tend to be lots of other people around who perhaps slip notes to the president and maybe poke him every now and then and put the call on mute and have a little chat amongst themselves?
Yeah, I think there is probably some of that, and perhaps there will be a few moments where it's just the two of them and an interpreter, of course. I'm not sure how great Putin's English is, but it's awkward, I would imagine, and I've been on calls and meetings where interpreters are required, and it makes it a little bit difficult to get into a real flow and a real chatty conversation. So I don't think this will be as warm and fuzzy as his recent meetings that I've referred to in the Oval Office. I think it'll be a little bit more, let's get down to business. But, I'm sure there'll be some niceties, and I'm sure they'll have a chat. But, look, I'm agreeing with you. I don't think we'll come out of this tomorrow with some grand peace plan that's completely penciled, completely penned. I think it'll be more progress. It'll be, we agreed to continue with the process and negotiate. And it's good to know that the president is talking about specific assets, because he doesn't want Ukraine to be at a great disadvantage here. He doesn't want Ukraine to come out of here with challenges to their critical infrastructure, challenges to delivering energy to their people. So I think that's wise that he's already talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, this can't be a complete, set of agreements by President Trump meeting all of Moscow's demands and none of Ukraine's. I mean, what about, NATO membership? Is that really 100% off the table? And must Ukraine really surrender all the territory that Russia currently occupies? What sort of concessions do you see President Trump obtaining from President Putin?
Yeah, I think there will be. I think there will be probably concessions around land that they don't currently occupy, that they have their eyes on. So I think there's, some limits to that. And also, I think the NATO situation has been completely off the table for quite some time. 7 countries in NATO have already said that they're not supporting a membership. So this isn't like Sweden and Finland joining, where there was only one holdout in Hungary, and they were convinced to come over. When you have 7 countries with veto power, it's just completely off the table. And it's probably one of the things that sort of inspired this invasion in the first place, as horrible as it is. Having NATO equipment on the ground, I think that's one of the red lines for Putin, but maybe it's not. Maybe that can be dialed back a bit. But I don't think there's any reason to bring up NATO membership, because it's impossible at this point with 7 countries in opposition.
Okay, so President Trump's already said that's not going to happen. And as we've been saying, maybe he'll manage to extract some concessions in return from the Russians. But in terms of next steps, I mean, supposing some sort of an agreement is struck, I mean, what does President Trump do then? Does he get back together with the other European allied nations and report back and discuss next steps with them? Or do you think he doesn't see them as being particularly, involved?
Well, no, I think they are involved. They will be involved, especially when we get to the point where there's, they're talking about security guarantees and increasing military spending. And we've seen that commitment out of Brussels and frankly, the UK in the last few weeks. So we just have to make sure that continues. But no, I don't think he means to disclude the Europeans. He thinks it's more productive to have bilateral talks. Even when he was having discussions with Putin and with Zelensky down in Riyadh, in Saudi, there was always back channels. You have the National Security Advisor, you have the Secretary of State working with the Europeans, working directly with the Ukrainians. So this isn't some idea that he's only going to work with Putin. I think that the concern on the left and in much of the media is way overblown on that. It's a bit alarmist. This is, again, presidents have done this for generations, spoken directly to adversaries, and I think it's necessary at this point.
Okay, and how far off? I mean, we've seen these warm sort of fireside chats, well, sometimes heated rather than warm fireside chats in the Oval Office. President Trump and a visiting head of state or prime minister. How far off are we from having President Putin in one of those yellow armchairs, do you think?
You know what? It wouldn't shock me. It would not shock me at all to see Putin in that position at some point. And I think the reason is President Trump is thinking differently. He knows that Russia ultimately is only successful, and this should be from Putin's perspective too, when they're doing business with the West. They were selling energy to the Europeans, especially to the Germans. Even last year, the Europeans bought $22 billion worth of oil, gas, and coal from Russia. That's more than the $18 billion that they gave in aid to Ukraine. So, Putin can't survive without the West. And more importantly, the U.S. and the West do not want Putin and Russia to be partners with China. That's the real issue here. So Trump's thinking the long game. This is not unlike Nixon and Kissinger going to China when they were afraid China would get into bed with the Soviet Union in the early 70s, and then reaching out later to the Russians and express, at the beginning of the détente phase of the U.S.-Soviet relationship. So, look, nobody wants World War III here. So the best way to do that is bring Russia back into the fold. We've tried before, it hasn't worked. We thought China coming into the global trade system would liberate their political system. It has not. So there's been failures in the past, and I think even Truman would have some regrets about what Roosevelt did in Yalta. Basically selling out Poland to the Soviets in order to keep them in the war against Japan. But you have to try, and I think this president is an optimist. He's an anti-war president. He's all for peace. He'll use military strength when necessary, like you saw over the weekend when he took out a lot of the Houthi bombing installations in Yemen. He'll do it. He'll take out the leaders of terrorist organizations, but he doesn't want to get into a boots on the ground war with 19-year-olds coming home in body bags. So I think good for him for reaching out and making sure he's doing everything to keep the Chinese and the Russians apart in the long run and trying to get a path to peace here.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the Houthis a little later on in this programme. Meanwhile, thank you very much indeed for your time. Always a pleasure talking to you. Greg Swenson, Chair of Republican Overseas UK. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Anytime. Great to do it. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, the European Union is not convinced that Russia really wants peace. Well, the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, says that the conditions demanded by Moscow prove that. Well, amongst those demands, Ukraine drop its NATO ambitions, surrender territory under Russian control, and hold a presidential election. That's something that Kyiv views as premature, whilst martial law is still in force. Well, Ukraine was top of the agenda in today's meeting at the European Foreign Ministers meeting in Brussels. Let's listen to a clip now of the EU foreign policy chief.
Well, those conditions that they have presented, it shows that they don't really want peace, actually, because they are presenting as conditions all their ultimate goals that they want to achieve from the war.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, was in Paris today, where he held talks with the French President Emmanuel Macron. Well, this was Carney's first official foreign trip since taking office, and it comes in the context of tensions with the United States. Well, the new Premier said it was important for Canada to strengthen ties with what he called reliable allies in Europe. Well, his next stop is London, where he'll be meeting Britain's King Charles III and the Prime Minister of the UK, Sir Keir Starmer. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to General Dominique Trinquant, who's a former defense advisor to the French President Emmanuel Macron. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, General Trinquant. How do you think the assembled EU foreign ministers feel about the Trump administration's approach to the war in Ukraine and to Moscow in general?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. The position now in Europe is very, is squeezed between the attack of Russia on Ukraine 3 years ago, or mainly more than 10, 11 years, but really high level of battles since the 3 years. And the fact that the US currently are not really supporting Ukraine, of course, but also the European position. So in between, the European try to find their way to have a more autonomous way of thinking and of being able of defend themselves. It's a long path, but I think that it has been initiated a few weeks ago, and now it's going faster.
So can you see a scenario in which Europe and Ukraine reject any deal, perhaps, that's struck between Presidents Putin and Trump and say, not so fast?
Yes, I think so. I think it's possible for two reasons. The first one is that probably what Mr. Trump will ask at the end will be exactly what Moscow is asking. So it is not possible. The second thing is that European country put credible means behind Ukraine, not only by providing weapon system and all that, which the Americans are doing also, but they are ready to put troops to support Ukraine, not in the battle, of course, but if there is an agreement. And apparently Moscow refused that, as Mr. Trump told Mr. Macron that he had to understand that Moscow will accept that. So I think Mr. Trump is a bit in a trap where he wants a real fast agreement, and one where Moscow, Mr. Putin, is not very happy about what's happening, and he wants to continue the war.
Yeah, I mean, the Europeans really don't sound very happy. We heard from the European Union Foreign Policy Chief, Kaja Kallas, saying that Moscow's conditions, and there are lots of them, we were talking about them just before we crossed to you, the conditions for a ceasefire show that Russia doesn't really want peace, she says. I mean, why do you think she's saying that on the eve of that all-important telephone conversation between President Putin and President Trump?
We'll see what's real. The two presidents, but up to now we have been different point of view from the US. When US was negotiating in Saudi Arabia with Mr. The Secretary of State was there, and apparently there was an agreement with the Ukrainian, and when it was sent to Moscow, then Mr. Putin say, yes, I agree to stop the war, but under my conditions. And we know that the conditions provided by Russia are unacceptable. So really the problem will be what will come out from the negotiation between and the conversation mainly, which is not really a negotiation between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin. The problem is that Mr. Trump is changing every hours of position. So it will be very, very difficult to understand what will happen after this phone call tomorrow.
Yeah, of course, the United States has given about half of the aid, well, just under 50% of the aid to Ukraine. Europe's given slightly more than that. And I'm just wondering whether you think perhaps the Europeans are irritated, for lack of a better word, perhaps not sufficiently consulted is how they feel. And, you know, here is President Trump essentially negotiating or talking on behalf of the collective West, which includes, you know, a sizable contribution to the war effort by the Europeans. Do you think that's why they're aggrieved?
Yes, I think that Europeans agreed on the fact that they are not part of the deal, not really, a bit, because initially there was no discussion with Ukraine, and they strongly argue that there will be no peace in Ukraine without Ukraine. And so that's a way to be part of the negotiation. Anyway, they understand that for Mr. Trump, they are not important. And they want to show that now they are important in different way, in the economical way, because it's the second or third economy in the world, but also in defense terms, because of course they have been late in increasing their defense budget, but now they are starting to improve that and try to organize their means. So probably the fact that Mr. Trump is so brutal initiates something in Europe, and I hope so. France have said that for many years, but now it's the reality facing all others European countries.
Yeah, so just to pick up on that, I mean, later on in the week, European military leaders will be gathering in London, I believe. I mean, there are these calls for France and the UK to play a bigger part in guaranteeing peace in Ukraine and protecting Ukraine. Is that realistic? I mean, do they have adequate resources to do that? That's assuming the Russians allowed that scenario.
Yeah, the first thing we've got to realize that is after 3 years of war, the Russian army haven't defeated Ukraine. And now we are talking about the European altogether. So I think in support of Ukraine, they've got the strength to support Ukraine, which is already facing Russia. The second point is that you're right. There was a meeting last week in Paris, chaired by the Chief of Defense Staff from France and from UK, and that was very important because the link between the two countries after the Lancaster Agreement was very strong and going furthermore than the European organization. And so I think that the meeting this week, in London will be a planning session, which is very important because you can't wait to have an agreement before planning. You've got to plan, and if you plan, you are able to be part of the negotiation. That's why they've got to go very fast and go to this planning session next week. And then we've got to put into the negotiation, of course, and the planning session, all Europeans which are willing to join UK and France and see what they can put on the table. France have already said that France is able to put a brigade in Ukraine, not to face Russia, but to support the Ukrainian. We'll see what the other countries are able to do.
Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it? You've got Brexit Britain on the other side of the channel from where you are, looking increasingly towards European allies, and Europeans looking increasingly towards London, hence the venue for those talks, very much singing from the same song sheet. But how would you describe, what words would you use to describe the state of transatlantic relations between Europe and the United States? Where are we?
I think it is a necessary link, but a difficult one. I mean that Europeans shouldn't wait every 4 years to know what's the decision of 20,000 electorate in US. They must be autonomous, put burden inside NATO, the European pillar, and then be able to discuss with US and not only to sustain what US is deciding. So I think the link is really necessary, but we must be realistic. Europe is not in the center of the interest of the US. So we should show that we are an important part of the link, not only the US link, but also the European link.
And in terms of what's happening on the battlefield and what's happening in Ukraine itself, I mean, there have been some heavy strikes during the course of the weekend, heavy aerial bombardment on both sides. I'm wondering if you think that's a sort of a typical thing to happen ahead of some major talks, as each side perhaps tries to show that it's in the stronger position. Is that something we typically see ahead of this stage in negotiations?
Oh yes, certainly, and specifically the offensive on Kursk by the Russian is of major importance for them. They don't want to start a negotiation with a part of Russia which is occupied by Ukraine, and they go further from that, of course, because they pretend that part of Ukraine is already Russian. anyway, the increase of fighting is something inevitable before a negotiation. But we should realize that, in fact, Mr. Putin doesn't want peace. He wants to continue war because war is a necessity for his way of governing Russia. I mean, he can keep Russia as it is under a dictatorship only because there is war. So if it is not the current war, high-level war in Ukraine, there will be another war at perhaps lower level in the future.
And I just wanted to ask you, last of all, General Trinquant, about the visit to France by the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney. I mean, how interesting do you think it is that he chose France, specifically Paris, as his first destination in his capacity as Prime Minister, and not the US, as we have tended to see in the past from Canadian Prime Ministers? What does this say to us? What message do you think he's sending out?
I've got very good relation with the Canadian, and I know that they are very upset about what Mr. Trump have said, that you will be, the 51st state of US will be Canada, sorry. So they are very upset. And there is something very interesting, is that the free world now is more concentrating around Europe than around the US. You know, in the meeting last week, we had Japanese, Australian, New Zealand, Canadian, of course. It was amazing. So apparently with the current administration in the US, there is a sort of opposition between what is the free world and what the US represents. And so I think that this visit by the Canadian was the first step to show that really they are closer on this side of the Atlantic than on the other side. And may I say that the UK has realized that they are on our side of the Atlantic, which is very important.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. General Dominique Trinquant, former defense advisor to President Macron, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you. Bye.
The United States says it's going to keep attacking Yemen's Houthis until they end attacks on ships in the region. Well, this weekend's airstrikes resulted in the deaths of more than 50 people there in Yemen. Well, the Houthi-run health ministry has described these airstrikes as being the biggest US military operation in the Middle East since President Donald Trump took office in January. Well, the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told Fox News that the campaign might continue for some weeks to come. Well, we can get more now from Mick Mulroy, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, who joins us now from DC. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. So we've got a situation where the United States is carrying out airstrikes on Yemen. Just tell us what the goal is here.
So, Tom, I think it's clear that this administration, the Trump administration, wants to set a new status quo, if you will, with the Houthis. They redesignated them a terrorist organization, and this was a substantial escalation in strikes. Of course, the Biden administration did take military actions many times against the Houthis, but this was very comprehensive. It was within 5 different provinces within Yemen. It included leadership targets, so not just storage facilities and logistical routes. Those were included as well, but also they went right after the leadership. And I think it was meant to set a different standard, if you will, for reaction to the Houthis, as well as send a message to Iran, who we believe supports them with the weapon systems they're using to attack commercial vessels and the U.S. military assets in the region.
So do you think these airstrikes are going to have the desired effect, Mick?
It's hard to say. I mean, the Houthis seem impervious to military pressure. However, they can't essentially attack these vessels without these weapon systems. So if they can use really solid intelligence to get to find out exactly where these weapon systems are being held, deplete them, and also cut off the new supplies, most likely coming in from Iran, They can have all the desire in the world, but they don't have the capability. And that's what I think the U.S. is going for here with these systematic, comprehensive strikes, to include the leadership. Again, if you could take out the leadership, that has a big disruptive effect on any campaign plans they have against either the U.S. They're now threatening partners in the region that house U.S. military assets, as well as these commercial vessels, which is, a terrorist act in and of itself, and certainly has a big impact on the world economy, as so much of the world energy, for example, comes out of this region.
So just how significant is the threat posed by the Houthis to international interests, in particular those shipping interests you were talking about just now?
Of course, a lot of the reasons why this hasn't escalated sooner is the Houthis hasn't been successful, especially when it comes to attacking U.S. military vessels. If they are, because, at any given time, some of these defensive mechanisms can fail and they hit a U.S. vessel and kill U.S. sailors, this is going to escalate out of control. So I think it's important to point out that reasons why it stayed somewhat in the box is because of the ability to intercept these systems. That also includes, they have hit commercial vessels. They don't have the same capacity to defend themselves. That's why the U.S. military and our coalition partners have been doing that. But it has a serious effect on commercial shipping. They have to take an entirely different route. It adds billions and billions of dollars in expense, which of course is passed on to the consumers that take, for example, energy from this region. And that affects countries as far as the Far East. So this isn't just a regional issue. It certainly isn't just an U.S. Houthi issue. It's a global issue. And I think the U.S. is going to just continue to take the lead in this and potentially escalate to de-escalate, is what they say, which basically means get superior military power to the point where the other party backs down.
And in terms of the strength of the Houthis, we understand there are tens of thousands of fighters, an arsenal of drones, some ballistic missiles. How strong are they, and where are they getting all their weaponry from?
Predominantly, they're getting the weaponry from Iran, and many of the things that they use to attack these ships are coming straight from Iran, essentially. And the forensic will indicate that. There is an attempt, I believe, by the Houthis to try to manufacture some of their weapon systems there. It does, in a way, protect the Iranian hand in this. But it's clear from the U.S., all our partners, that they know who is behind this. They are a proxy force, not a direct one. They're not as substantial as Hezbollah when it comes to taking tasking from Iran. But if Iran didn't like what they were doing, they would stop sending them weapons, because if they didn't have that capacity, again, they can have all the desire in the world, but they wouldn't be able to carry this out. And so the clearest indication of Iran's willingness to see this happen is the fact they keep supplying them with weapons.
Right, and you mentioned Hezbollah there, and of course Hezbollah has been quite significantly degraded in the last 6 months or so. The same can be said of Hamas. The same can be said of Bashar al-Assad's regime, which has been toppled in Syria. And I'm just wondering, some people will be wondering, how is it that the Houthis are still standing, given what's happened to other Iran-backed entities in the region?
So they have been preparing for this, and in many cases doing this for many, many years, even before the Biden administration, back into the first Trump administration. So they have strong fortifications. They have the ability to protect themselves. They show very little interest in the well-being of the people of Yemen, but they are essentially a mountain fighting force, and they have been effective at that. But now, as you mentioned, Tom, the Hezbollah, Hamas, many of the militias that used to basically run free in Syria have been destroyed and largely now are ineffective. So the effort can turn toward the Houthis, also known as Ansar Allah. And that can be done by both the coalition led by the United States and the UK and Israel, because they keep trying to attack Israel. It appears that one of the weapon systems they shot that landed in Egypt was probably intended for Israel. So now that the firepower, if you will, can be concentrated on the Houthis, they may be able to do what they did to Hezbollah, really deplete them to a point where they were just ineffective as a military force, fighting force.
Yeah, and you mentioned Israel there, and of course the Houthis say they're acting in solidarity with the Palestinians, particularly the Palestinians in Gaza, I should say. So when we were in the phase of the ceasefire, for example, which is still there, but it's been challenged in recent days and weeks, but did we see a corresponding lull in the fighting and the violence and the attacks carried out by the Houthis during that sort of early phase of the ceasefire? I mean, do we believe that what they're doing is purely in solidarity with the people of Gaza?
So no, I mean, they had been doing this before the war in Gaza started. I mean, you could even think of the attacks on Saudi Arabia and their oil facilities, multiple attacks against U.S. assets in the region, again, way before the war in Gaza started. They claim it's having little to no effect on Israel's their decision making when it comes to Gaza. But essentially, by tying it to them, if they want to keep their word, if there is a long-lasting ceasefire and the ceasefire continues, then they should correspondingly stop attacking the vessels, partners in the region. So we'll have to see that. I don't think anybody believes that the Houthis are going to keep their word, but they have said that, and now they said they're continuing because of the humanitarian aid has been cut off by Israel. That could cut back on very quickly if the Hamas, agrees to extend the first phase of the ceasefire agreement with hostages being released and humanitarian aid coming in at scale. So we'll have to see what the Houthis do, but I don't think anybody really expects that they won't stop fighting until they just don't have the ability to fight.
Yeah, so do you see this being what we saw at the weekend, these airstrikes by the United States on Houthi targets? Do you see this as being perhaps the beginning of a protracted campaign by the US?
I think that's the plan, and that's from every statement we've seen from Secretary Rubio to National Security Advisor Waltz. They have said this is the beginning. This wasn't a one-time event, so this could last days, weeks, potentially months. It really depends on how quickly they can get them to a point where they don't have the capacity. That's what seems to be the ultimate goal as it pertains to the Houthis. The other goal, I think, is to get Iran to come to the negotiation table. It's clear that the Trump administration wants to see a renegotiation of that JCPOA, is what it was called, part 2.0, which Iran right now has rejected even starting the negotiations. I think the administration would like to see this change that perspective.
Yeah, I was going to say the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei doesn't sound particularly keen on this idea, just reading the latest reports there. But do you see eventually the Iranians coming to the table and President Trump managing to strike a deal with Iran? And would that in turn put the lid on this violence in Yemen?
I certainly think it's possible. And I think from the U.S. perspective, they would like to see a comprehensive agreement that includes not only Iran not getting a nuclear weapon, but also Iran not supporting their proxy forces that's caused so much of the destabilization in the region. I think if they can get both of those, then on the flip side, Iran should see substantial, if not complete, removal of sanctions against them, which would unleash their population, which is very innovative, very educated, and certainly would do well on the international economic market. And so there's a reason for both sides. And of course, the biggest, I think, gain that we would all have is there won't be a nuclear arms race in the region, and the region, the Middle East, would essentially stabilize because there wouldn't be all these, support of these, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis fighting basically on the side of Iran without any attribution. So certainly the region has a reason for wanting this to happen, and so does Iran. This could really help them regain their economy and join, the International League of Nations.
And just lastly, I mean, how would you sum up the Trump administration's approach to Iran and its proxies? What are your sort of forecasts for how the next 3.5 years or so could unfold?
So I think we're at a fork in the road. I think the Trump administration, which has always been hawkish on Iran, more so than, say, the Biden administration, will want to use pressure like we're talking about to get Iran to essentially come to the negotiation table to end this destabilization activity and to really, with validation, not seek a nuclear weapon. If they don't, I could see this escalating to direct military action by the U.S. against Iran if they believe that they're on the verge of acquiring a nuclear weapon, and Israel for that matter. If it goes the other direction, diplomacy, this could be very good. There could be an agreement that's beneficial to both sides on this, and certainly to our European partners and our partners in the Middle East. It really is going to come down to, I think, the Ayatollah and the leadership in the Iranian regime, whether they're willing to do this or whether they're going to face what could be overwhelming military force. And they've already showed they're really not capable of standing even against Israel when it comes to conventional military force. So we're at a fork in the road, and hopefully the fork that they take is toward diplomacy and integration back into the world economy.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your time, as ever. Mick Mulroy, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, thanks again. That is all we have time for today's edition of Global News Today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place. Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome, of course, to the Saudi House. Today, we're going to be talking about climate change, Saudi Arabia in particular, their contributions to addressing global environmental challenges. His Excellency Adel Al-Jubeir is here with me. Your Excellency, it's wonderful to see you as always.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I want to kick off, though, by asking you about what we've seen in just the last 48 hours. U.S. President Donald Trump signing a raft of executive agreements and pledging to withdraw from the Paris Accords. In your mind, does that damage the world's ability to fight climate change?
I don't believe so. I think there are different ways of achieving the objective that we all want, and countries can pursue whatever path they believe is best for them. I think the important thing is the bottom line. The Trump administration in the first term actually did a lot to reduce carbon in the United States. So this is a very positive development. I think the important thing is that we look at these discussions as cooperative discussions, not as negotiations, because we're all trying to find the most optimum path forward to dealing with the challenges in a way that's unemotional, that's logical, that's scientific, so that we can overcome this challenge that we have. We're all in this together. There are no winners or losers. We all win or we all lose. That's the attitude that we in Saudi Arabia bring to this discussion.
Just 2 years ago here at the World Economic Forum, Al Gore described what was happening in climate as boiling oceans and rain bombs. A lot of people pushed back on that at the time privately, but they didn't necessarily feel comfortable doing so on a public stage. In your mind, how are these words changing when we describe climate?
We have a challenge that is before us with regard to climate change and with global warming. Nobody can dispute that, and the impact that it has on not only our climate, but on our politics, on conflicts, on not in dispute. I think what we need to adopt is a rational, scientifically based conversation, not grandstanding and not threatening, because it will be like the shepherds who cried wolf too many times and then nobody believed them. We know we have a problem. We know we have a challenge. So now that we know this, let's not talk about how it's going to kill all of us. Let's talk about how we extricate ourselves from this problem. We can do it by education, we can do it by more rational policies, we can do it by more efficient production of energy, we can do it by more efficient use of energy, we can do it by investing in alternative sources of energy, we can use it by combating desertification, by land restoration, we can use it by funding research to experiment with transformative technologies. And we are in Saudi Arabia doing all of this. We are setting aside 30% of our territory, land as well as sea, to be protected areas so that they're untouched. We are investing in greening. We are investing in transforming waste into energy. We are investing in solar, in hydro, we're looking seriously at nuclear power. We're investing in capturing carbon from the atmosphere. We're investing in a blue economy. We're investing in our seas and sustainable fishing. We are doing all of it because of two reasons. One, we live on this planet. We breathe the same air everybody does, and it's important for us that it's a healthy planet. And two, it's also very profitable. So there's an economic incentive to do this. And we have taken our experience and we expanded it into initiatives like the Middle East Green Initiative, which includes more than 22 countries, to teach countries how to incorporate the circular carbon economy approach so they can deal with environment and climate change issues the way we have been, so that we all benefit in our region. Because, as I said, we all win or we all lose. We are all in this together, and climate and pollution doesn't differentiate between one country and another. That's why the effort has to be regional and it has to be global.
Would you say then perhaps that the election of Donald Trump and his presidency is the great reset that the climate conversation needed?
I hope it would be, because I think everybody is concerned about environment, and everybody is concerned about climate, and it's important that all of us, individuals and nations and companies, do everything we can to deal with this challenge. But we will deal with this challenge. We have the technology, we have the financial resources. We need the political will to engage in a positive, cooperative conversation where we all come up with the best way forward, rather than engage in an emotional, argumentative, political scoring, hypocritical conflict that serves nobody.
Speaking of hypocrisy, over the last several days in the Financial Times, there's been reporting that billions of dollars have fled out of green ETFs and green investing. In your mind, are they jumping the gun there?
I don't know why they pulled out and what investment criteria they have. I do know that in Saudi Arabia, the investments that we have made in renewable energy, in solar, in turning waste into energy, when we're looking at nuclear, when we're looking at efficiencies, ensuring that we don't have flaring of oil and gas, that we don't have leakages, that those have been extremely profitable. We have huge investments in electric vehicles. We're looking at producing electric batteries. We're looking at storage facilities. And for us, these have been very profitable investments. So we are committed to continuing to invest in this. But in terms of the withdrawal of funds, I don't know what was the reason for them investing in those funds in the first place. I don't know what the returns are, so I'm not in a position to comment on it. But what I can say is it could be a function of people getting excited, wanting to do politically the right thing, and then realizing maybe the funds should have gone somewhere else.
When you think about what Saudi Arabia is doing in this fight against climate change and to make the planet, frankly, a better place, it was interesting, His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz just a few days ago during the Future Minerals Forum in Saudi Arabia talked about exporting enriched uranium, yellow cake. That's politically dicey, if you will, as you know. In your mind, how do you explain those kinds of exports to the world?
Very simple. We are a large energy producer in the world. We want to be an exporter of energy to the world, whether that energy is oil or gas, whether that energy is solar, whether that energy is electricity, whether that energy is hydro, whether that energy is nuclear. We want to have a nuclear program in Saudi Arabia to produce energy. We have between 1% and 4%, according to estimates, of the world's uranium deposits in country. It makes a lot of sense to exploit those resources economically by mining it. It makes even more sense that once you mine it, that you engage in the processing to turn the uranium into fuel that you can sell at a higher price. So that includes all of the steps in turning uranium from dirt into energy. And it involves taking advantage of the associated industries that come with this and taking advantage of the profits that come with this. We do not want to be a country where mining companies come in, dig up the soil, remove it, do all the processing and all the refining and all the producing of energy outside. We end up with a hole and we take less than 10% of the value chain. We want to benefit jobs, associated industry, and profits. And we believe that we can do it, as does the International Atomic Energy Agency, in a way that has nothing to do with producing nuclear weapons. Our objective is energy and profit.
Tell me this, speaking of weapons, in the years past, we've often talked about how Saudi Arabia in the 70s and Russia just a few years ago was using energy as a weapon. In your mind, how vulnerable are we today in our energy systems? And I'm talking about whether it be the enormous amount of energy that AI, as we know, is going to require, whether it be just oil markets generally. How vulnerable are we today in our energy markets?
I don't believe, I wouldn't describe it as vulnerable. I would describe it as we are looking at an increase in demand that needs to be filled somehow. Because if it's not filled, then you're going to see a huge spike in prices. And AI and data centers require a lot of energy, and that energy has to come from somewhere. We in Saudi Arabia want to be a hub for these centers. We have the land. We want to be able to, we can produce that energy using renewable energy, solar energy, other energy, and we can do it efficiently. And we believe that given our geographic location, we can have the connectivity to be able to send it abroad. So this is one of the priorities for us. So I think that this is how I would look at it. In terms of oil weaponizing energy, we have maintained for many decades that oil is not a weapon. It's not
anymore.
It's not a weapon. You can't shoot it, you can't fire it, you don't take it to the battlefield. It's a commodity, and it's a precious commodity. It relies on supply and demand, sets the price. We want to be a responsible producer. We have been a swing producer where we try to keep the markets in balance as much as we can to reduce the massive fluctuations in the price of oil, so that it makes it easier for people to invest, to borrow money, and to return their investment, and also to plan long term. That provides stability for the global financial markets, which serves us because we are big investors and we are energy producers, and we want stability in the financial markets.
Yeah. Donald Trump is widely expected to visit Saudi Arabia in the near future. What kind of conversation do you want to have with him regarding energy and climate?
President Trump is most welcome in Saudi Arabia anytime he wants to come. And I think the conversations between Saudi Arabia and the United States, we have been allies, we have been partners for 80 years. We have huge interests, whether it's bilaterally in terms of trade, investment, in terms of cultural exchanges, in terms of students, in terms of whether it's regionally. We work very closely together on bringing peace and stability in a region, maintaining security in a region, whether it's globally, the same issue. We have very important relationships on technology, on energy, on investments. We are large investors in the U.S. economy. American companies are large investors in the Saudi economy. So it is a huge relationship, and it has many, many dimensions to it. And every time our two countries have worked closely together, they have been able to achieve great things, whether in terms of stability and security and peace regionally and globally, and in terms of prosperity for both countries when it comes to trade and investment issues.
There's a lot of speculation about what the U.S.-China relationship will be in the future. Saudi Arabia, of course, has a strong relationship both with the United States and, of course, with Beijing. How worried are you about the possibility that a trade war between the United States and China could derail your agenda as a country?
We have very strong relationships with both countries. Our relationship with the U.S. is a strategic relationship. China is our largest trading partner. We believe that stability in the global financial system and the global market serves everyone. And we hope that the two countries will be able to negotiate their differences, because a trade war does not serve the interests of either. And I believe that we have seen in the past that the two countries have been able to negotiate or resolve their issues and reach understandings through by discussing it rather than by turning it into trade wars.
Talk to me a little bit about the region when it comes to climate. Obviously, we see the UAE made a great deal of strides, obviously hosting COP28. In your mind, as Saudi looks forward to its own hosting of a COP, what are some of the things you're hoping that the region is able to achieve?
Our region, the Gulf region in particular, has done, I think, an outstanding job in terms of dealing with climate, the challenges of climate, as well as land degradation, as well as biodiversity. So the Rio Trio, the three COPs, we have invested tremendous resources in it, beginning with education and all the way to implementation. In Saudi Arabia, we have more than 70 initiatives domestically that deal with all of these issues. We have initiatives globally. I mentioned the Middle East Green Initiative. We established the Global Water Organization. That was an initiative by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince to bring clean water and how we use water more efficiently to as many people as possible. We are part of the Methane Pledge. We are involved with cleaning oceans, and we're involved with reversing pollution of plastics. We are involved in a lot of initiatives, and we have provided investments to many countries around the world to help them with resilience, to help them with beefing up infrastructure, to help them with desalination, to help them with on and on and on. We are doing a lot of things. We hosted COP16, the Earth COP, was a land degradation and drought COP, and our objective was to raise the awareness level and highlight the link, the nexus between land degradation and security. If you have land degradation, people don't have food. They move to places where they can plant food. Chances are people live there. You have conflict, you have bloodshed, you have violence, you have extremism, you have terrorism, you have migration. The migrants end up in a country where there could be a reaction that leads to extremist politics. So when you look at extremist politics in Europe, you can trace its linkage to a particular place in Africa or in the Middle East. And you can trace the origins of that conflict to drought. You look at the countries in the Sahel, 90% of the Chad River evaporated since the 1960s. It created dislocations for millions of people who moved, created conflict, and then we're paying the price. Darfur, Sudan has been engaged in a conflict for almost 40 years. And it started with drought. And it turned into a conflict, ethnic conflict, civil war, people paying the price. And our objective is to highlight this to people, invest early in land restoration, and avoid the consequences that will cost us 50 times more to deal with than if we had dealt with it at the outset. And the irony of all of this is investing $1 in land restoration generates between $7 and $30 in profit. This is better than investing in high tech. Why don't people do it? And this is what we're trying to show people. And it's not this is not an issue, land degradation, that concerns North Africa and the Middle East. Germany has a problem with the waters of the Rhine. Southern Europe has problems with drought. This is an issue that impacts everyone. Sweden gets dust from the Sahara Desert, as does Costa Rica. We get dust from as far away as the Chinese desert. Now we have a lot around us, but so this is a global issue, and it's straightforward to deal with. We just need to focus on it and get it done, and this is what we're trying to do in Saudi Arabia.
You may remember President Biden's Secretary of Defense, as well as the current Secretary of Defense in the United Kingdom, have cited climate change as their number one worry for the planet, their number one concern. Now that we have Trump in the White House, is climate your number one concern for the planet?
Ours?
Yeah.
I believe for everybody, the issue of climate change, the issue of whether it's too little water or too much water, the issue of rising temperatures, everybody acknowledges this.
But is it the number one concern facing us?
I think it certainly is. If it's not the number one, it is right up there, because it impacts everything. It impacts, for example, desertification, impacts the reflection of the sun, impacts weather patterns over the Atlantic, impacts the frequency and intensity of hurricanes in the Caribbean, impacts weather climates around the world. Dust can do the same thing. And also the climate issues can impact what happens in the oceans, and the oceans are our biggest reservoir for carbon. And that impacts, again, the rain patterns. And so it's a cycle that impacts everything we do, and it's linked to economic development, it's linked to wars and conflict, it's linked to prosperity. 800 million people on the planet are undernourished. The amount of land we can grow food on shrinks, populations are rising, so we're heading towards conflict. We have to fix these issues. And I don't believe that anyone disagrees with this. I believe the differences have to do with what's the right way to move forward in tackling these issues. And I think that grandstanding and emotions and hypocrisy and threats and shaming and naming and finger pointing doesn't get us anywhere. Rolling up our sleeves and planting trees, redesigning our cities, investing in technology, investing in alternative sources of energy, pointing out the benefits and the profitability of that path is what will get people to move towards the right direction. And when we can deal with these issues, they will have a direct positive impact on security, which will then have an impact on stability and peace.
It's interesting, over the last several days leading up to his inauguration, Donald Trump talking about Greenland. I've spent a lot of time in Russia and Ukraine, as you know. And when we talk about climate and what's happening in the Arctic, the ice, surprise, surprise, is melting. That raises security concerns. Russia has the most military intelligence hardware in the Arctic, as well as oil and gas infrastructure, as you know. In your mind, are we living in dangerous times as a result of climate change?
I think we are always living in challenging times. The history, unfortunately, of mankind has been one of wars, not peace and stability. I believe that the conflicts may shift from one region or another depending on the century we live in, but war has been a constant in our history, unfortunately. I think we are moving towards a global society, a global village. I don't want to call it village, it's too big for a village, where we now recognize that something happening on one end of the world has a direct impact on something on the other end of the world, which we never had before. How long did it take to get mail from Europe to the United States 150 years ago? Now it takes a nanosecond to get pictures and voicemail and from the Amazon forest to Siberia because of technology. How long? So now we deal with the issues of that go beyond our borders, that impact all of us positively or negatively. COVID doesn't differentiate between male, female, between Muslim, Jew, Christian, between Asian, African, European. It doesn't differentiate. We are all its target. And unless we all work together to contain it, we can't. And we did work together in spite of our differences. Maybe not ideal, but in a very effective way to contain it and push back against it. So we are, in one hand, yes, business as usual, challenging world, you called it dangerous world, but also business as unusual, which is a recognition that we need to deal with each other to handle global issues like pandemics, like climate, like transportation, and that those issues can only be handled if we work together. So on one hand, you're seeing the world coming together much more closely than before, while at the same time we're the same in the sense of our tensions. And my hope, and I believe this is where we're heading because I'm an optimist, is that as we learn and more, as we learn of the benefits that we get by working together, the side of the side of the equation that spells cooperation grows, and the side of the equation that spells conflict gets diminished. Because where does conflict get us? Nowhere. We can have conflict for 30 years and we'll be worse off than we were when we started. Whereas if we have cooperation, technology, artificial intelligence, trade, in 30 years we can be many, many times wealthier than where we are today. Which vision do you want? Going forwards and upwards or going backwards and downwards?
Are we, as he says, safer, the world, with Donald Trump in the White House?
I don't see why people talk about this. I think, yes, the world is safer. The world is safer with anyone in the White House. The world is safer because the world is beginning to recognize that we need to work together. We need to deal with challenges that are beyond us as nations or as ethnic groups or as religious groups, and that we have to deal with problems or challenges or dangers as humanity, that we can't escape that. And I believe that we are beginning to do this, and we will continue to do more of this. And so I'm hopeful that our children and grandchildren will be living in a world that is more together, and more calm and more prosperous and more healthy than the one we live in.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Your Excellency, I want to kick off by just asking you to walk us through how you see the role of public service, because it's not only a family legacy, but it's also a passion.
Just for some context, for those who might not know, my grandfather was Shahid Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He was the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Pakistan. He gave us our constitution. He was a voice for the disenfranchised, and he gave his life for his country. He was sent to the gallows by a cruel and conniving dictator who sentenced him for a crime he did not commit. Only for 50 years later, for the same Supreme Court that was stained with his blood to come out and say he was innocent. Only proving my grandfather's last words, which were, "Oh God, help me, for I am innocent." My mother, Shahid Mohtरमा Benazir Bhutto, was the first and youngest female Prime Minister of Pakistan and in the Muslim world. And it was her pursuit for justice for her father which propelled her into politics. And hers was a turbulent journey. She faced police brutality, incarceration, character assassinations, too often used on women, exile. She was basically a mother raising her children, as well as fighting for my father's release from jail, and all the while running and leading the largest political party in Pakistan. So as you can see, it's not an easy legacy to live up to, but it's one that I can't walk away from. For my family, sacrifice, service, fighting for the greater good is all we know. My grandfather used to say that the paradise of God lies under the feet of your mother, but the paradise of politics lies under the feet of the people. And for my family, these are not mere words. This is our ethos.
How do you view the situation for women in Pakistan today?
What I've seen with my mother, and something that I still see today, is that women have to work twice as hard to get half as much acknowledgement as a man. But we are a strong and resilient force. The founder of our nation, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, used to say that there are two great powers in this world. One is the sword, and the other is the pen. And there's a great deal of rivalry and competition between the two. But there's a third power, greater than both, and that is our women. So the more time I spend on the ground, I see what a strong force we are. And with regards to the issues that women might be facing, whether it's in Pakistan or globally, you name them, we're facing them. Be it inequality, be it security, be it access to healthcare, education. But we are a strong and resilient force, and the more time I spend on the ground, I see that with the power of the vote, we manage to make our voices heard. And for those who haven't voted or for some reason are outside the voting apparatus, they too, when they join forces and rally together, their voice can make cities come to a standstill.
Yeah. You wear two hats. You're a member of parliament as well as being First Lady. How do you square the two? Because you need to be outspoken for your constituents, and at the same time, sometimes it's difficult to be political.
That's true. I've only recently become First Lady as my father became president, and as a widow, he decided to name his youngest daughter First Lady in order to fill that role and make sure that we have a strong representative for women and women's rights.
Do you feel like you have to hold back?
I have to hold back slightly when I'm in the arena of being the First Lady. But as a member of the National Assembly, when I'm on the National Assembly floor, I will be fighting for my people's rights, needs, and whatever they say to do, I'm their public servant.
Yeah. In discussing your family's legacy, it's impossible not to focus on the fact that politics, as you know, can be deadly. Right now, Imran Khan says he's under threat for his life. How credible, in your mind, are those threats?
I think that anyone who says that their life is in danger is a threat that we need to take seriously. But it is heartening to see. It is heartening to see that all the avenues are open to him. For example, all the courts are there for him to fight his cases. All his needs in jail, whether it be for his newspapers or gym equipment, are being met. And I would not wish anyone in Pakistan to face great difficulty, and I hope he will go through the avenues of the court, and the courts will have their verdict.
You've Are you confident he will have a fair treatment by the judicial system?
I think so. I do believe that he'll be able to put his case forward, and based on what the evidence says, they'll be able to make their decision.
Talk me through this. You have been a passionate proponent of the need for vaccines, particularly with regards to polio. When you see those in the United States, for example, President-elect Trump's pick, RFK Jr., who's a vaccine skeptic, does that worry you?
Right now, I'm more worried about the issues that Pakistan is facing. I'm sure that the United States has a rigorous campaign to, before you go to school, you have to get vaccinated. There's before any large forums, there need to be vaccinations for your child to make sure that at every stage they get their vaccinations. But with regards to Pakistan, I'm an advocate for polio eradication in Pakistan. I've been their ambassador also for the United Nations and Rotary International. And the challenges we face are greatly different.
Yeah.
And some of in 1994, my mother actually gave me the first oral polio vaccine. And this was when she was prime minister at the time, and she often said that as a woman leader, she brought an additional role to her office. She brought that of a mother.
Yeah.
So she spearheaded this campaign across the country. Then I would have to say that the changes in government leads to an issue for us on the ground. We had a period of dictatorship under which the reality of the situation was simply not being reported. We went through another change in government under which all the stakeholders, be it the president, the prime minister, the army chief of staff, all believed that this was an important issue and they were determined to eradicate this disease. Then we went through another change of government under which the government at the time did not take this seriously. And when the heads of government don't take this issue seriously of vaccination, there's a trickle-down effect. It trickles down to the bureaucrats, it trickles down to the health ministers, the health systems, all the way down to the health workers on the ground.
Yeah.
That this is not a serious issue. So I would have to say that that is one of the challenges that we're facing. A second challenge is that there was a misuse of our vaccination drive for security reasons, which brought about a lot of mistrust amongst our nation. We had clerics preaching that this vaccine would cause infertility and spreading misinformation. And this is an ongoing process. We have to take them on board as stakeholders and explain to them that this is the same vaccine that the United Arab Emirates uses, this is the same vaccine that Saudi Arabia uses, and they've managed to successfully eradicate this disease. So this is an ongoing process. But as a consequence of these two issues, we've had a lot of targeted attacks on our polio workers. There's been senseless killings of our polio workers on the ground, and our security forces also who are protecting them, and their only crime was that they were trying to fight for our future generation. Their crime was that they wanted to ensure that every single child was vaccinated. So these are some of the issues. And lastly, I would have to say our geography. We're on the border with Afghanistan, and we see a great deal of migration that occurs. And in that process, some children miss our national immunization drives. We've made progresses in this. We've put vaccinators at the border. We've put vaccinators in between cities and in between provinces. So we're determined to try and reach every single child out there. I would have to say that these are some of the challenges we're facing. But if I talk to you about the progress that we're making, I would have to say that, and the successes, I would have to say that every single child vaccinated is a success. Every single child we manage to save from this crippling disease is a success.
Yeah.
And until we reach the ultimate goal of a polio-free Pakistan, these are the successes that I need to hold on to and build on.
You mentioned geography. Obviously, you're in a position at this point where geography has a great deal of impact on not just foreign policy, but obviously on the situation for women. How devastating, in your mind, was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, your neighbor? Because at this point, it seems as if the international community doesn't or isn't able to help those women. We gave them great promise, and then we abandoned them.
With regards of the way the exit from Afghanistan was conducted, I think that record speaks for itself. It's devastating to see, but we have to have faith in the Afghan government and their systems to try, and we have to ensure that as a country like Pakistan, who it's our neighbor, we can try and encourage them to, take on board our women and perhaps not go with such stern language when it comes to them. But it's also that they are their own country, and we can't dictate them to tell them what they should do.
Yeah. Do you happen to think that there's something that the international community could do to help women there that they're not doing? Is there a pressure that we could exert?
I think that it's a very difficult situation because in the manner in which they stayed and they exited, it causes great difficulty for anyone in the world to dictate to them what they should or should not be doing.
Yeah.
So I think engagement with the Afghan government is the best option we have.
Yeah. Tell me this, when you think back to the legacy of your mother, not just as Prime Minister, but also as a parent, what are some of the lessons?
As I get older, even 16 years on from her assassination, I realize that there was a lesson in everything she said and did. And despite the greatest odds, she managed to endure with incredible elegance, dignity, and grace. And if you've ever seen Succor Jail and the conditions she was in, you would see how difficult that was. So in the face of adversity, I can only hope and pray to have half as much elegance, dignity, and grace as she did.
"16 years on, what is your advice to the women in this room as they look to take their place, not just as women, as mothers potentially, but also as those who are leading corporations, excited about being entrepreneurs and startups, and also going into politics?"
My message to young women would be to believe in yourself, remain steadfast in your values, never underestimate the power of your voice. Leadership is not about privilege and position. It's shaped by purpose and persistence. And we must remember that the road ahead will be challenging, but we must embrace education, foster empathy, commit ourselves to uplifting all those around us. True leadership lies in service to others and the pursuit for justice, opportunity, and equality for all. My message to the younger generation would be that you are the architects of a brighter future.
Walk me through this one. As women, we often discuss how we are not just subject to the regular standards. We are also subject to even higher standards in what we wear and what we say and how we do our hair. Do you believe that that's evolving?
I would hope and pray that this evolves. However, I will give you an example. Well, it's heartening to see the number of women leaders across the world today.
Yeah.
I still think that we need to face issues that our male colleagues don't necessarily need to face. I can give you an example. I was in an interview with a prominent international news organization, and at the time we were talking about the crackdown on our party, the fear I had for my father's life in jail. This was his 2019 persecution against him, not to be confused with the 90s persecution against him. And at the end of the interview, I still get asked, "But do you like to cook?" So as women,
what do you like to cook?
But as women, we have to still prove today that yes, we can cook, we can clean, and we can lead. And we must simply have to endure and keep going.
Yeah, I mean, the unfair criticism I think that we've seen for women politicians across the board in the West as well. I mean, Hillary Clinton, not attacking her words per se, or challenging her words, but challenging her choice of outfit. Yeah.
I try to model my outfits on the basis of my mother.
Yes.
And it brings me a lot of comfort to have her white dupatta style around me. It makes me feel that I have her with me at all times.
And embrace. And just to close out our session, in your mind, where are we today in this region? Because the extraordinary strides made right here in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, for example, are inspiring, but the region still has more to do.
I think, number one, we must acknowledge the United Arab Emirates. Just look at this platform today. Many of our neighbors don't have this platform, and this is truly a global event. People from all across the world, all across nations, everyone has an inspiring story, a history. So I think that we need more platforms like this. And hopefully the region around us will also evolve into understanding the importance of women, giving them an opportunity, giving them a glimpse into public service and seeing how well they shine.
Yeah, and speaking of that glimpse into public service, what would be your suggestion to those in the audience today who are looking potentially to go into public service?
I believe that the world is your oyster and there is an opportunity everywhere.
Yeah.
And especially in the United Arab Emirates, just look at the number of cabinet members. Look at the people in His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid's office. The number of women has grown every single year. And I think that other countries around the world need to model this.
Yeah. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Hadley.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on